All right. I am Ben Burgis, and this is Give Them an Argument. We have been gone a while. There are a couple of reasons for that. So I have been working on this new book, the Matt Crispin book that I mentioned a little while back, adapting the Kush vlogs that Matt did, from started in 2020 and for a couple of years after that into a book of essays. And that has, been really awesome, but it's also, been and will continue to take up a lot of time. But I certainly did not need to take the whole month off in May, and we will have at least several episodes over the course of the month of June. We are going to be back this Monday with an episode with a couple of guests. I'll probably preview a little bit at the end to talk about Marx and Hegel and analytical Marxism and the relationship between those things. And next Thursday we have another one like this. Again, more about that in a little bit. But right now, this is going to be a debate between me and Jillian Michaels. So we recorded this just over a week ago. So at Michaels's studio, she lives, or spends some of the year or something. I'm not totally clear in Los Angeles. So we did it in person, and it went up on her channel yesterday. And so I have a lot to say about this, but I think before I say any of it, let's at least watch a bunch of the conversation.
It sounds like a lazy bum to me.
This is a lazy bum who is producing how many, thousands and thousands of pages of work that's read to this day. Somebody who is very, very, very committed. And I don't think that sounds like a bad thing.
Capitalism versus socialism. Dr. Ben Burgis joins me for what is unquestionably one of the most contentious debates of our time. But today, we are bypassing the standard cable news theatrics and partisan vitriol for an exceptionally respectful, high-level exploration of the economic frameworks that are shaping our world. And if you're looking for an intellectually rigorous, non-tribal, respectful sharing of ideas, this episode is for you. And as always, guys, if you're liking the show, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe.
Keeping it real with Jillian Michaels.
Dr. Ben Burgis, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate your willingness to come and talk with me about these things, especially when we're probably on very different sides of the political continuum. Mm-hmm. And I have a thesis. This is my thesis. I think the vast majority of us want the same things. Mm-hmm. We just have different ideas on how to get there. Now, so you don't think so? Okay, fair. That is my thesis for the vast majority of people. Yeah. I think we all want to be healthy. I think we all want affluence. We all, love our family. We want the country to do well. We just have different ideas on how to get there. So, you and I were going to talk about a couple of things, but most specifically, we were going to talk about socialism or democratic socialism.
Yep.
Okay. So you are an expert in this. I am not. Okay. But everybody that I have had on my show comes from the, this is evil perspective, right? I've never been able to talk to anybody who does not think so. And this is where I'm like, okay, teach me what is the other side of this? So I have a million questions. Mm-hmm. Okay. And if I could start out with the most egregious.
Sure.
A lot of times when we think of things like socialism, I say we, myself, people who are more aligned with me politically, immediately you think of this as a stepping stone into communism. Mm-hmm. And even Marx himself said it's an inevitable stage towards communism. And then when I think about that, here's what I think of, okay? Mm-hmm. I think of obviously Karl Marx. So here's some facts about these people. And it's just, I find them to be a bit scary. So Karl Marx, 11 people showed up to this guy's funeral when he died because he was so unpopular. He was thrown out of Prussia, thrown out of France, rejected from Belgium.
Yeah, but why was he thrown out of those places?
Okay, so hold on. Okay, moved to England, but Britain denied him citizenship within 1 year of arriving. He was kicked out of his apartment for failing to pay his rent, and he used a fake name to hide from his creditors, and his wife had to pawn his pants to buy food. Go. Why was he kicked out? I don't know.
Okay, well, because he was a dissident journalist in an authoritarian regime. I mean, that seems like a pretty straightforward, pretty honorable reason to be kicked out of a country.
England wasn't an authoritarian regime, was it?
But he wasn't
No.
kicked out of England.
Oh, okay. Moved to England, but Britain denied him citizenship within 1 year of arriving in London.
He did get citizenship. I mean, that's what you're reading. I don't know off the top of my head, but like he lived in England until he died, right? Like the places where he was kicked out, right? Was from Germany, right? Prussia, I guess, at that point, right? Which is where he's from. And yeah,
France.
I mean, that was an authoritarian regime, right? Like he had, he was the editor even before he became, a socialist of the Neue Rheinische Zeitung, I think it was called, which was like a liberal newspaper that was advocating reforms. And so he was kicked out. You say, okay, he's stirring up trouble, but it's like, look, you could say that, you could say that about all kinds of people I think that you would like, right? Who are kicked out of different countries, right? People who might be like right-wing people who were kicked out of Cuba, people who might have been kicked out of Iran, right? People, et cetera, right? So it's like,
okay,
why is this the case where this is a strike against him?
Fair. Good point. Okay, good point. Okay, here's the second argument here, is that this guy couldn't even pay for food. How is this guy going to design an economy? He can't even cover his basics.
Well, again, I mean, I think if you have somebody who probably could have had like a pretty good life if he hadn't been committed to his political principles. I mean, he got his PhD in philosophy. He could have just been a philosophy professor. I don't think anyone denies that, right? That he could have done that. But again, he became a dissident journalist. He cared about these political views. He had so I think that, what it sounds to me like you're describing is somebody who is so deeply committed to what he believes in that he ends up throwing away what could have been a good life to exist kind of on the edge of poverty, try selling articles to the New York Herald Tribune. This sounds,
I struggle with that a little.
This sounds pretty good to me, right? Like I think
he sounds like a lazy bum to me.
So this is a lazy bum who is producing how many thousands and thousands of pages of work that's read to this day, is logging God knows how many thousands of hours at the library at the British Museum, researching. This sounds to me, right? Like somebody who is very, very, very committed. And I don't think that sounds like a bad thing. Now, I also think that if he was, you wouldn't like him anymore. I mean, I don't think that the reason that you don't like Karl Marx is that you think that he should have gotten a job at the post office.
I kind of do think, my son loves Fortnite.
Yeah.
He's very passionate about it.
Yeah.
He could do it for hours at a time. I'm like, yeah, but that's not how it goes, honey. You have to do things you don't like. You have to do the hard work. You have to put in the time. And if you could spend your whole life playing Fortnite and you're passionate about Fortnite and everybody else should pay the bills, that's where
so if you take somebody who's let's say a Soviet writer who was kicked out of the Soviet Union for opposing the regime there, ends up somewhere in Western Europe, devotes himself full time to his journalism, trying to expose that regime, trying to agitate for change, and and he's living in poverty because of that. You don't think that there's anything about that would make the guy I'm describing better than somebody who just wants to sit around playing video games all day?
Okay, fair point. It does seem to a certain extent, though, I want everyone to pay my bills, which we'll get to the concept and you'll address it, of meritocracy and the risk that you take when you put yourself out there.
Love it. Let's do it.
Well, hold on. I will promise I'll get you. Okay, but then here's where this gets okay, so let's say he's just this idealist.
Okay.
And I'll get to where does it work, where doesn't it work? But then if it's this progression into communism, then it starts to get bad.
So what do you think?
Mao, Stalin, Lenin, Che Guevara.
So what do you think Marx means by communism?
I'm looking at regimes like Mao's China. That's what I think he means.
Okay.
That's what
why do you think he means that?
communism is his
but-
utopia.
But again, like you were just saying, he uses the word communism, and these governments use that word communism, therefore it's the same thing. But I don't think that follows, right? I think that'd be like saying that you take like the Spanish Inquisition and say, well, there's those they called themselves Christians, so therefore Jesus or the Apostle Paul wanted the Spanish Inquisition, right? Like I think that kind of feels like that same kind
So
of
you're
thing.
saying they bastardized his vision.
I'm saying that I don't know where in Marx you're getting the idea that what he's advocating is authoritarian one-party states. I mean, this is a guy who
How is it not turned into that though? When it comes to yeah.
turned into makes it sound like you have countries that started out as something he advocated and then they turned into that. So.
Okay.
So again, I mean, you look at what he actually advocated over the course of his life. This is a guy who, he certainly didn't support any dictatorship that existed, while he was alive. As far as I know, the only head of state anywhere in the world he liked enough to send a friendly letter to was Abraham Lincoln.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
Sent a telegram to Lincoln to congratulate him on his reelection because he was passionate about the war against slavery. This is the one time. As far as I know, right? I mean that the one sort of radical experiment, in his lifetime that he praises is the Paris Commune in 1871. If you read anybody who wants to look this up, it's called The Civil War in France. That's what he wrote about it. And if you read what he praises about the Commune, a lot of it is this sort of ultra democratic stuff where they make every state official have the salary of a skilled worker. Everybody is immediately recallable at any time and for any reason. Factories are turned over to be run by workers associations democratically, right? That's the stuff that he was into. And I mean, I guess just saying like, okay, you have these other people later who claimed to be inspired by it. I feel like, look,
they're like the worst of the worst, Ben.
Well,
worst: Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Che Guevara. Che Guevara, they called him the sadistic enforcer. I didn't even know how bad this guy was until I was preparing for this interview. Like, he's a crazy racist, by the way, which is the separate conversation. But he literally, like all the businessmen that fled, he stole their homes. He had servants. He was like overseeing executions. He was a terrible person.
Okay. But again, I mean, this is, I'm a democratic socialist. To me, it's a little bit like if we were arguing about religion and you were an atheist and I was like a Southern Baptist or something, and you started telling me about all the historical crimes of the Catholic Church, right? I'd say, oh, okay, but like this is delivered to the wrong address, right? Like whether you're right or you're wrong about this, right?
Okay.
Like they have a I think if you want somebody to, argue with you about Cuban history, I mean, I'm probably not the best guest for that, right? I'm sure there are lots of people.
I don't. I think my concern is that it starts out with all these sexy promises and good intentions, and in its worst cases, it descends into these really bad people doing really bad things, and then literally I have like country after country after country after country where it goes to hell in a handbasket.
So again, you say country after country after country, but that suggests that you have country after country after country where you start out with a democratic form of socialism and you become an authoritarian one-party state.
Okay.
Is that what you're claiming?
Okay, so so let's just start with this one example. This was told to me by Glenn Beck.
Okay.
I'm sure you don't like Glenn Beck, but I'm simply saying he's been on my show. This is what I've been exposed to.
And anybody who wants to check it out, by the way, Nathan Robinson and I reviewed his book, Arguing with Socialists for Current Affairs several years ago. So if you just Google Glenn Beck Arguing with Socialists, and my name, like just because you mentioned Glenn Beck, right?
Well, I mentioned because he gave me this example, right? When I was asking questions. So it's like I'm able to ask him questions. I'm not able to ask you people like you. And that's why I'm so grateful you showed up. So he brought up a very specific example. Now, this wasn't socialism because it didn't exist at the time, but it was. So it was strict communal property system. It was the Jamestown colony. And it went so far south because they were all supposed to do the work and share the goods and nobody owned land. And they ended up hating each other, killing each other. It fell to complete shit. And only when somebody came in and said, okay, we've got this head right program where everybody gets 50 acres of their own land. You're now responsible for yourselves. You have autonomy. Then it started working. And so that concept doesn't seem to work. You've got the Soviet Union, USSR, didn't work. Poland in the 70s and 80s, didn't work. East Germany, didn't work. Romania, same time, didn't work. Hungary, no. Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Albania, no. Yugoslavia, no. This is where it's like, this is what I know. Maoist China, good Lord. North Korea, no. Cambodia.
So you know, the first thing you said when you were starting all
this is obviously, it's like a list of 50-something countries.
Was that you had country after country after country where things, you said, started out with good intentions, but then they went to shit.
I'm guessing they did. They made these promises to the people.
Again, if you're saying, okay, you know, if I advocate a democratic form of socialism, well, we know that this turns into this, then what I want would be an example of places that started out as a democratic form of socialism and became authoritarian, because as far as I know, you know, most of those countries that you just rattled off, you know, Czechoslovakia, North Korea, whatever, right? Like, you know, whatever you think about, you know, those countries, they have this is like, as far as I know, none of those countries, right, started out as a democratic kind of socialism and became an authoritarian kind of socialism. I think, as far as I know, the only case in the history of the world that looks anything like that is Russia, and even that, I think, it's a pretty murky example.
Think of those promises, like, we're going to distribute the wealth, we're going to make it fair. It's all kind of that, and then they end up being the ultimate. It's always, by the way, you know, these bastards are not fair, and they're hoarding wealth, but then they end up like Che Guevara, stealing people's mansions and having servants and shit.
Okay. So again, like, is your contention that, like, Cuba started out as a democratic form of socialism?
Didn't it sort of?
Not that I know of.
Really?
I mean, is that your, I mean, like, but I mean,
I'm honestly asking you.
I'm open to being corrected, but
no. You'll know better than me. I'm honestly asking you. That was my interpretation, is that when these guys start out, right, they're super sexy because the promises are like free stuff for everybody and the rich guy's going to pay. And everyone's like, yes, the rich guy will pay. But then it never works in all these scenarios. I know we've got the Nordic countries, and we'll get to that, but the parallels between them and us are different, which I know you'll address. So
like, there's certainly the starting point of, like, a Sweden or a Norway is going to be a hell of a lot closer to us than a North Korea, right?
Of course. You know, I mean, you've got vastly divergent, and I just
want to say, right, like, because it seems to me that, looking out at the history of the world, we have a zillion examples of democratic capitalist countries that become authoritarian. In fact, often become authoritarian because they, you know, in the name of anti-communism.
Can you give me examples?
Sure. So, I mean, you know, Italy and Germany, right, are both cases of capitalist countries where, when, you know, fascists came to power, they did it in to a great degree because they said, oh, you need to support us, right, to stop communism. Chile in 1973 is a great example. You have, you know, democratically a socialist president. Salvador Allende is elected to office. He's overthrown by General Augusto Pinochet, starts a reign of terror, you know, with support from the United States. I don't really see any examples, right, of the opposite, right, of, you know, again, maybe Russia, depending on how you, like, sort of see what happened the first couple of years of history there. But other than that, I see no examples of countries that started out with a democratic form of socialism and became authoritarian because of that, right? So I think that if you say,
so you think these guys all start? It seems like it was a very slippery slope. Like, the people.
Slippery slope from what, though?
Okay. So, for example, every time I hear people who come from these regimes, whether it's like Venezuela, or, you know, even Iran, like, when the people who've escaped Iran, they talk about the Ayatollah, it was like, you're gonna get free this and free that and free this and free that, but then it ended up being something very different than what they thought they signed on for. So, same thing, like, you've got these, you know, Che Guevara, this character who's, I'm going to give up everything, and they all come from wealth, by the way, which is. I mean,
Iran is certainly a capitalist country, and Venezuela even, like, I mean, they have the government has, you know, certainly used socialist rhetoric, but if you look at the numbers, the public sector in Venezuela is smaller than it is in lots of European countries. I mean, that this is
Venezuela's.
Like, it's very
not a capitalist society.
So. Well, let's think about that. How would you define a capitalist society?
By people being able to start their own business, a private sector.
Okay, so yeah, most Venezuelans, you know, work for the private sector. I mean, like, if you look up the percentage of public sector employment by country, certainly those Nordic countries we're going to talk about all have
those
way
are
more
good cases.
All have way more public sector employment than Venezuela has. I mean, if you want to say, that there
But they
isn't.
nationalized everything in Venezuela.
Well, they
Private
did
farms, factories, supermarkets, strict price controls, destroyed domestic production.
So
Like, they're
halfway through that
communists.
sentence, you switch from talking about nationalization to talking about price controls. Nixon did price controls. I don't think there's anything socialist about that.
Okay.
I think that I think as far as nationalization, they clearly didn't nationalize everything, because if they nationalized everything, most Venezuelans would work for the public sector. That's not the case. There are fewer Venezuelans than Swedes who work for the public sector.
But they don't seem to have any jobs to take it all because everything fell into disrepair.
Sure, but the point is, I don't think you can meaningfully blame that on socialism, because what you'd have to do if you're going to say that the problem in Venezuela was too much socialism is you'd have to say, what's the metric of socialistiness that would make Venezuela socialist that wouldn't make those Nordic countries socialist, because all those places have a higher proportion of public sector employment than Venezuela does. Like, you have, it's certainly not, I mean, if you look at somewhere like Norway, you have public ownership of the oil industry, which is one of the main things, if you want to say there's something socialist about Venezuela, that would be the main thing. So I think it's going to be very hard. I think oftentimes
How is that
people
not socialist though? If they literally nationalized private farms, factories, supermarkets.
So after all of that, what proportion of the Venezuelan economy is then nationalized? And I think that's what you'd have to look at, and that you'd have to compare to other countries to see, am I applying the same standards to every country? Like, in other words, if Venezuela is a socialist because you have X percentage of the economy has been nationalized, then you'd have to say, okay, well, what's the percentage in Sweden? And if it's more, then how are you going to say, well, that's not socialist with more of the economy in public ownership, but Venezuela with less is? Is
that a fact?
As far as I know. I mean, if I have, look, when you put this out, right? I mean, like, if I'm wrong about this, I mean, like, absolutely stick something in the end, about this. But last time I looked it up, it was certainly a fact.
So here's the short and sweet fact check on this. Ben is right that more people work in the private sector in Venezuela than in the Nordic countries, but there's a very key difference between the two economies. So the Venezuela economy failed because the government controlled everything that private businesses needed to survive. So even though people work in the private sector, the state choked those businesses with three fatal policies: price controls, forcing businesses to sell goods below the cost of production, which caused massive shortages; seizures, arbitrarily taking over factories and farms, which destroyed all investor confidence; currency monopolies, cutting off businesses' access to foreign cash, which they needed to import raw materials. So, for example, when oil prices crashed, their domestic industry had already been too suffocated by state regulations to produce food or supplies, triggering a total economic collapse.
Okay, I just want to point out I don't have a problem with the fact that she's stuck in this fact check, because I did invite her to fact check me. But I also want to point out that in the first line of the fact check, like the first line, the first sentence is the only part that's actually a fact check. The rest is just a separate argument, right? So I said that Venezuela has a smaller public sector than Norway or Finland or Sweden or Denmark. Therefore, if you're going to say that Venezuela nationalizing stuff makes it a socialist country, and therefore all of its economic problems are the fault of socialism, you would then have to say, just logical consistency, that Sweden and Denmark and Norway and Finland are socialist countries, and their extreme economic success is a sign that you could have more socialism. Again, this, if you want to say that's not socialism because socialism means workers control the means of production, or socialism means overcoming the value form, or whatever, that's all fine. I'm using her definition, right? So there's no consistent way of using the word socialism that would make Venezuela socialist, but Norway and Sweden and Denmark and Finland not socialist. Because if it's workers control the means of production, none of those places are socialist. If it's, that you have marketless, moneyless, full communism, none of those places are socialist. But if all you mean is public ownership of the means of production, then Venezuela would therefore, if you think these things come in degrees, be less socialist than Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland. And if you say, oh, they don't come in degrees, it's just binary, then, on any of these definitions we're talking about, all of them would just be not socialist, right? That's the point. And, I said that the public sector is smaller in Venezuela than in any of these other places. But if I'm wrong, please fact check me when you put out the episode. She did a fact check. First sentence of the fact check, Ben is correct that the public sector in Venezuela is smaller than it is in any of the Nordics. And then she just makes this different argument that there's something more socialist about Venezuela, which is actually an argument that she made. She didn't need to repeat it in the fact check. She already made it during the main part of the conversation, as we were watching a couple of minutes ago. And, my response at the time was, well, Nixon did price controls, right? Like, that doesn't seem terribly socialist. It's a perfectly normal thing for, capitalist countries in wartime, for example. In fact, I could have added that, by definition, right, with the whole point of price controls is that the state doesn't own the enterprise. They can only regulate it, right? So it's a regulation on what the separate owners do when they set prices. Oftentimes it's a foolish regulation. I don't disagree with that. You're not going to find me advocating, sort of a general system of price controls. I never have, I never will. But also, I just want to point out that if we switch from the definition she gave earlier, which is, capitalism is about being able to start, private sector businesses, to the new definition that's implied in this fact check, that capitalism is when no price controls, socialism is with price controls, then that means that we could implement the economic model that I advocate, right? That we have everything be either publicly owned, directly in the public sector, or else run by worker cooperatives. So we take away all the productive property from the private capitalists, and we run some of it in the public sector for stuff that we still need market mechanisms. We make that all worker cooperatives, funded by public banks. Hey, as long as we don't have price controls, I guess that wouldn't be socialist according to this definition. So it's very confusing. Anyway, back to the main event.
But I do think it's imperative to mention, once again, this is also not the type of economy that Ben is advocating.
All right. I appreciate that.
For.
Really? Okay. So when I understand this continuum of laissez-faire capitalism to full-blown communism.
Okay.
Laissez-faire capitalism creates monopolies and just, I think, is a disaster.
Okay.
I also think communism is a disaster.
Okay.
Regulated capitalism is where I would land. So on the scale, right, if you've got, so laissez-faire capitalism, regulated capitalism, democratic socialism, socialism, communism.
Okay.
Where's Sweden?
Sure.
And where's Venezuela?
Sure. So I think I would think about the scale a little bit differently. That might be part.
Really?
That might be part of the reason we're disagreeing. Right? So the way I would think about it, right, is that full socialism. What I would mean by socialism, would be a situation where you had a society that wasn't divided into a class of people who are running things and a class of people who are working for them, because workers, right, collectively and democratically, broader communities they're a part of, ran that economy. And so I would say that what you've got, in authoritarian, capital C communist countries is just something pretty different from that. If you want to say that's a kind of socialism, I like the semantic argument doesn't seem super interesting to me, right? If tell me how you want to use the word and we'll use it that way, right? But if it is a kind of socialism, it's a very different kind of socialism than the kind of socialism that I would advocate.
Sounds like there's a ton of nuance, basically.
Well, I mean, it just,
which is great. I love nuance because I think that we are incapable of holding it nowadays.
So I mean, here's maybe a simpler way of doing the take, right?
Okay.
Just say, who's in charge of that stuff, right? Is it whoever can afford to buy them, right? Or is it workers and communities? And I would say, right, if you want to talk about a spectrum, and I'm happy to talk that way, then the spectrum that I would care about, right, at least, right, the kind of socialism that I would advocate would be about, look, how much power do private capitalists have, and how much power does the working class have? Do workers, do the broader communities they're part of have? And I would say that anything that gives working class people more power versus wealthy business owners makes a society more socialist in the sense that I care about. So if we have, if you don't have to rely on your job for your healthcare because we have Medicare for all, that would be an example of something to make us more socialist.
I hate our healthcare system. I think I just have different ideas on how to fix it. And I will promise that. Sure. I just want to finish. I want to get to I have a whole train of thought that I need to walk through with you of my sort of belief system. And I will.
Absolutely.
Because see, this is my point.
Yeah, sure.
The healthcare system here is a disaster. I agree with you. I just have different ideas on how to fix it.
So I do want to get into that, but just 10 seconds on
please, let's stay
the previous
here.
thing, right?
Yeah.
So they have so I would say that the Nordic countries on that spectrum, right, like that I just talked about, have, come about as far as any country has in the world today that I know of. But, I'd like to go even further than that, right? I mean, I don't want to just say like, yes, right, like Sweden is like as good as a human society can get. We can't do any better than that. I want to go further in the same direction, but I think that if you're in the United States, right, where people do rely on their jobs for their healthcare, for example, where it's very difficult to organize unions, for example, then I think that like that at least shows us that we could travel much further down that road.
Is it difficult to organize unions?
Oh yeah.
Gosh, Ben, I thought it was the exact opposite.
Okay.
Summer has a way of making us rethink.
All right. While we skip past the ad in Jillian's video, this is a good time to say that this, this might be one of my favorite parts of the debate. We're going to debatey conversation, whatever you want to call it, because we're about to start talking about all the ways in which it's really hard to organize unions in the United States because we have one of the most anti-labor law regimes in the developed capitalist world. And I think to me this kind of makes it worth it, like all by itself, because at the end of the day, I don't think that your average Jillian Michaels viewer, right? Somebody, with the demographics, age, political media diet, right, who's likely to watch this show, has ever heard the combination of words like Taft-Hartley before. And if nothing else, I think just making them a little bit aware of that, to me, makes the whole thing worthwhile.
Let's talk about.
Sure.
I'll jump ahead. I'll jump ahead because these are my thoughts on unions. Tell me where I'm getting this right or wrong. Okay.
And I mean, just tell me when to do this. But I would love to talk about the ways that we make it hard to organize one in the U.S.
Oh, you're going to do it right now. Okay.
So
This is my very rudimentary understanding of unions. Okay. So to me, this seems again like a situation that requires balance, right? So in other words, when everything's going badly, you've got a situation where they're so strong. Okay, I'll give you an example.
Sure.
Here's an example that I pulled that I wanted to ask you about. So it's the UK in the 1970s, and this guy Attlee, who unseated Churchill, had put a more socialist system in place, but they ended up in the 70s with stagflation, and here's why. They called it the British disease because the government guaranteed jobs, state-owned monopolies like the British Rail or British Leyland Cars became wildly inefficient, deeply in debt, and immune to market realities. The union stranglehold, trade unions, grew so powerful that they could effectively shut down the country to demand wage increases, which drove inflation higher, and this culminated in the 1978-1979 winter of discontent, where trash piled up in the streets, graves went undug because of strikes, and the country was functionally broke and unmanageable. Then Thatcher comes in, and she takes inflation from 22% to 4%. Now, just real quick, this is where I would say, okay, here's what seems to be the balance on this one. And tell me if I'm getting this wrong. All right, hold on. So unions, right? If they get too strong, it protects shitty workers. I've seen this with my kids' teachers. and it's like last in, first out, which really sucks because some of these young teachers who are reinvigorated, who are passionate, they're the first one out the door because of the union. It makes big businesses send jobs overseas when they get to be too powerful. I do think, and I know you don't like him, and I've seen a few things he's done lately that I appreciate, but I remember Bezos being like, I just want a deal. I fact check me, Fletch, and see if I'm getting this wrong, but I feel like I remember him saying he just wishes he could automate everything. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. But that's arguably the reality, right? Is these big companies are just going to send jobs overseas. They've been doing it. And then there's the political capture element. So one more example, during COVID, California was the last state to send kids back to school. 2 years. And kids at the last one because the teachers union had Newsom by the cojones. I don't love that. That's not what the science was saying at that time. Now, conversely, all right, so just get ready to attack this. Okay, so conversely, it prevents arbitrary abuse, prevents discrimination, requires severance or due process, and protects whistleblowers. Love all of that. So to me, it looks like, where's the Goldilocks zone?
So, okay, so first thing on what you said about Britain, I would just point out that that story that you just told has a big time jump, right? Because you started off talking about Clement Attlee, and then you were talking about the 1970s.
It's like
right?
20 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, Attlee comes to power right after World War II, right? And
it went well for a while.
And this is, I think, what a lot of British people would, I think look back on very fondly, right? I mean, it's where they created the NHS,
Right.
which is like the most popular institution in British society. Even conservative politicians, the National Health Service, for anybody who doesn't know this,
Yes.
even conservative politicians never campaign on, I'm going to get rid of the NHS and have private health insurance because they know they'd never win another
Don't
election.
they offer it though? They do offer it as well.
So it is at this point kind of a complicated, messy patchwork, right? But they do still have, like, the core of the British healthcare system is still the NHS, and nobody's going to say we want to get rid of that because you wouldn't win an election, right? There's no way you'd win an election, and so it seems to me that if you want to tell a cause and effect story, that the problem is that in the 1940s, Clement Attlee created the NHS, so every British person had a right to healthcare, which is amazing. My sister lives in the UK. We've had many conversations about this. And like this is, just getting to never have to have a conversation about healthcare with anybody but a doctor, right? Is incredible, right? So we did that. They have the coal mines, I think you mentioned, the railways. I think I would argue the privatization of the railways has gone really badly there. But if you want to tell. Yeah,
worse than where they ended up with the winter of discontent and stagflation, and because that's like historical. But even I can pull that reference out of my rear end.
But like, is that because the railways were public?
It claims to be the fact that the workers had so much power that they essentially held the country hostage.
I mean,
and then the work didn't get done.
I mean, look, anytime there's a big strike and you have, you want to say like, oh, there's, somebody's holding it hostage. I always wonder, it's like, hold on, why is the person who you're saying is holding things hostage the workers, right? Why isn't it management, right? That's holding it hostage. It takes two, right, to have that kind of
management's the government.
The kind of standoff. Okay, but like again, I mean, just because that's the government's position, right? I mean, like, you don't just automatically agree with things because the government says it, right?
Hell no. That's part of my other concern is we're so effed up and dysfunctional. Who in the world wants to give them more power? But you haven't taught me about the union piece yet.
Sure, right. So again, I think that anytime you're trying to make a cause and effect claim over like 25 years of history, I get really suspicious. I really want to see the work on that, right? To say that this thing happened in the late 1940s and that's why this thing happened in the 1970s. So that's one like very basic point.
Could it be that they accrued power and then it ended up getting to a place where it was untenable because that balance that I tried to make a case for in the beginning of this conversation became out of balance?
So look, if you do think, right? I think we have a bigger disagreement here, but if you do think that, like, you take that view that you just laid out, right?
To be honest, I don't know a ton about unions. This is really what I just told you is the extent of my knowledge.
Okay.
I see good and I see bad. And this is where it's like, I don't know how much of a disagreement we have. You could teach me something and change my mind completely in about 5 seconds here.
I seriously doubt it. But
Oh, really?
yeah,
All
but
right.
like, but if
You'd be surprised. That changed my mind a lot.
but if you,
I'm big on like new information.
fair enough, that's good. But like, I think like if you do think, okay, that there's this balance you talked about, I don't really think that. And maybe we can get more into the sort of like bigger philosophical disagreement. But I just want to make one like basic point about this, which is if there is this balance, if you want unions to have a certain amount of power and not too much, whatever, then it seems to me that where we are in the United States, I have a really hard time seeing how you could look at this situation and think and think that our problem is that workers have to have too much collective power.
I don't think it's our problem. I think there's the potential for that, and I saw it like when they wouldn't let kids go back to school.
Or
that crappy teachers take precedent over really good young ones. I experience it through my kids. That's my knowledge of this.
Yeah.
That's about and like an understanding of the fact that auto workers unions can be corrupted because the CIA, like I just learned about this one little fact recently. That's about the extent of my knowledge.
Okay, well,
what I know is I want workers to be protected. I want whistleblowers to be protected. I want them to have benefits and all of the things and not be exploited. But I also don't want them to hold my school system hostage for 2 years.
You just mentioned auto workers, and since you mentioned your personal experience with the teachers, I will just mention, I grew up in mid-Michigan around a lot of people who had good lives, because of the UAW, right? This is why when people talk about
United Auto Workers Union,
United Auto Workers Union, right? That's when people talk about bringing manufacturing back as like as a goal, even Trump talks about that, whatever, right? It's like, well, hold on, but why were those good jobs in the first place? It's not because working in a factory is innately more fun than working anywhere else. In fact, if you talk to people who work in factories, it's really not, right? It can be pretty miserable and dangerous, right, in a lot of cases. But they have the reason those were good jobs is because they paid well, they had benefits, all of this stuff. And that's all because of unionization, right? And like right now in this country,
but then they left. That's what they did, though, Ben. Then they took their jobs for cheaper labor.
Okay, so is that good?
But it seems to be a reality. That's, I guess, what I'm saying.
Sure, but I don't think you have to just accept that, that this is a reality. We just have to deal with it. You just have to give the companies what they want, because otherwise, you want to talk about hostages, right? Otherwise, they'll destroy entire communities, by pulling out the source of, all the jobs there. Again, this is one of the reasons that I think, sure, but that's like saying that, hey, this guy shot the hostages because we didn't give it into all of his demands. Therefore, what we learned from this situation, the only thing we learned from this situation is next time we got to give into all the demands faster, right? I think that there are things we could do as a society to make that less likely to happen.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, so when I look at what Trump's doing, I'm sure you hate him, and I totally understand. But when I look at what he's doing, here's what it seems to me. He's like, okay, no problem. You're going to build your cars over there. I'm going to tax the cars that are built over there higher.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm not an economist, but when I see the intention, I'm like, oh, I get it. And you want to build over here? I'm going to give you a tax benefit build over here. And then companies started reshoring. Now, I've heard the argument of oh yeah, good luck, they're going to outwait his term. Maybe they are. I don't know. But unquestionably, companies are reshoring jobs here. And that's where I look at him and I'm like, how are we not able to go? He sees a problem. He's trying to solve it. And he's incentivizing with taxes and tariffs.
Right. So there are two issues there. One is the Trump tariff policy, which I am much less optimistic than you are about, because I think that he's done it in a way that I don't think makes very much sense. I don't have a problem with tariffs in principle. In fact, I agree with Sean Fain, the head of the UAW, who was like, when the auto tariffs came out, Fain hates Trump, but he was like, yeah, sure, great, that sounds good, right?
Okay.
But I think that the way that Trump has done the tariff policy is one, there's all this like blanket across the board stuff. I mean, we're gonna have tariffs on like coffee, which is like, that's certainly not protecting our domestic coffee industry. I don't know what part of the United
Do you
States
not think part of that
would be
stuff
in.
is leverage when he does that stuff? I don't like when he's like, I'm putting boots on the ground in Greenland. You're like, oh God. Even I just read a comment, on this show that I did today from a Canadian viewer, and they're deeply distressed when he says, I'm making gas. Now, I don't think he's ever going to do anything like that. I'm not saying it justifies what he's doing. I'm simply saying, to me, I read The Art of the Deal a long time ago, and this is like a whole.
Not sure Trump read it, but okay.
Fair. But my point is simply, I don't believe that he's ever going to do it. Like, I'm going to blow them to oblivion in Iran. He didn't. So.
Well, I think if other countries that had the power to do it were making threats like that about the United States, I don't think we'd like that. But
you're not wrong. I don't think he should make them. I'm simply saying,
sure,
he doesn't seem to ever. Hence the coffee conversation.
But going back to the tariffs,
yes,
right?
You're right.
They have what we basically got between Liberation Day and when the Supreme Court slammed the brakes on like a lot of the tariffs we had, what we basically got was a tariff policy that was changing like once every couple of weeks. And so my problem with this
for businesses
is if you're a capitalist who's like thinking about building a factory in the United States, like that is a long-term commitment, right? Over the course of many years, it's like you're not even confident that the tariff policy is going to be the same next month as it is right now. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
He did reshore hundreds of thousands of jobs.
The other thing that, I would just point out about this is that, again, bringing back manufacturing jobs, like the reason those were good jobs is because of the unions, and Trump is one of the most anti-union presidents we've had, maybe since before the New Deal. I mean, this is what I was trying to say earlier, it's already incredibly difficult. We have labor laws that are more, tilted against labor here than I think just about any other modern, liberal capitalist country. So if you want to organize a union at your workplace, even if you've got a majority of the people who work there to sign union cards, you still have to wait to do a certification election. During the lead up to that election, the company can make people do what called captive audience meetings, where as during your working hours, you have to go to this meeting where you get one-sided anti-union propaganda. You're not supposed to threaten to close the place down, but they always insinuate that, right? That's pretty standard. There's no right of reply. Union organizers
right of reply. I'm really sorry,
sir. There's no right of reply, meaning there's you only get one side of the conversation.
Okay,
right?
Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
and they have so if by some miracle after this, you actually win that, that certification election, and then, the boss drags their feet during, during bargaining for the first contract, in order to go on strike. After you pass the strike vote, you have a legally mandatory cooling off period before you can actually go on strike.
Okay.
When you do go on strike, under something called the Taft-Hartley law from the 1940s, that a lot of this is still in place, you have it's not legal to go on sympathy strike. In other words, you can't have one group of workers walking out in order to help, provide more leverage.
I see. So you're saying like airline people can't go on strike to help auto workers?
Yeah. Or even people who, or even
that would be chaos. Are you saying we should be able to do that?
Even people who work for the same company, but who aren't part of that particular union, right? You can't have one group of workers going on strike to help another group of workers. That's illegal. But you know what is legal is permanently replacing striking workers. You're not supposed to fire them, but you can permanently replace them.
That has a name.
Which is a what's up?
There's a name for people that take those jobs. I can't remember it. Isn't there, when they go in and they take someone's job?
Like a scab or a strike?
Maybe I've heard that.
Breaker,
okay, yeah, I don't know much about that.
I mean, this is
heard the term.
But I mean, this. I think that this, the whole thing that I just cumulatively described, right? I mean, what it's legal for the company to do, what it's legal for the union to do, I think is, little wonder that we have something like 6.2% private sector unionization, even though when you do polls, right? Would you like to be a member of a union, where you work? I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. I know it's several times that high, right? Because again, we make it really, really difficult to do so. And that's even under the existing rules. And the Trump administration has been trying very hard to weaken even that, right? I mean, there's something called the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, that enforces labor rights. And there's I don't know what the current state of the lawsuit is, but last I checked, there was Elon Musk through SpaceX. There were several big companies that had a lawsuit going saying that the powers of the NLRB to enforce labor law are unconstitutional. They want to completely get rid of it. And in fact, for a while, the NLRB couldn't even defend itself in this lawsuit.
Can you just redefine real quick? Because
Sure.
you talk about the NLRB,
sorry,
National Labor.
Oh, sorry, that's my bad.
Sorry,
National Labor Relations Board.
Okay, got it. Sorry,
Yeah.
I just want to say it one more time.
So basically,
got
if
it.
you're if you are fired for trying to organize a union, for example, right, that's against the law. So what are your options? So the NLRB is what's there. It doesn't have that much power. It's one of the few regulatory agencies that can't even issue fines, right? Like it doesn't even have that power. But what it can do is it can say you file what's called a ULP, an unfair labor practices complaint. And what it can do is, it holds a hearing and then it says, okay, you have to reinstate this person in their job. And it can't do fines, but it can at least make them pay you back pay from when you were illegally fired. And again, these companies are trying to get rid of even that. And the Trump administration for a while was trying to make it impossible for the NLRB to even defend itself in that lawsuit because they'd fired one of the members, I think illegally, but they fired one of those members, meaning there was below quorum, right? So they couldn't make any decisions at all. And
Okay.
if the NLRB didn't exist, then okay, you still have the regular court system. But what that means is if you're illegally fired, then you have to wait years, right? For your case
see,
to
be
to
adjudicated.
go through
Yeah,
court.
go through
And
the whole thing.
maybe at that time, right, you finally get your job back. But I think in the meantime, everybody else has got the message.
Okay, but here's what I hear.
Yeah.
I hear you describing one end of the spectrum
Okay.
where workers don't have the protection that they
Sure.
need and they lose leverage.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, the reality is these guys are taking this stuff to another country. They have done it. They are doing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they shoot the hostage.
okay, so then what I'm saying is the more it's like we're gonna give them all this power, they're like, oh yeah, well, we're gonna leave. So then even if I said I totally agree,
Yeah.
the result isn't good. So this is where I appreciate Trump's approach of how do we incentivize businesses to stay here? And is there a combination where you've got more of a regulated form of capitalism? Go after antitrust, you go after monopolies.
Yeah.
You have there's a basic, decent
Yeah.
human wage. We'll get to the health insurance
Sure.
stuff, but that becomes a component. And more.
Mm.
By the way, bit of a sidebar, but there's millions of empty jobs that they can't even fill right now. That's how do we, you want workers to come take these jobs, you got to be more competitive. There's I heard 7 million previously, but now I'm hearing 10 million job openings that people don't want here. So if you want them to come work for you, if it's a competitive market, you have to provide something sexy to them to a certain degree.
Mhm.
I just think, how do you thread that needle? Because when we do it, in my experience, or from my observation,
Yeah.
when we do it the way you're saying, these guys just leave, Ben.
Okay, but I guess what confuses me is that I hear you saying two things. One
Okay.
is you can't have unions that are too strong because then the employers will just pick up and leave. And then the other thing is, oh look, here's what Trump is doing that's great, that's going to make it harder for
Or
them
they
to pick
could
up and
cripple
leave.
things. They could drive up the price of a cheeseburger double, stuff like that. It's my understanding that we have narrowed the gap on some of these trade deficits. It hasn't crashed the economy, and jobs are being reshored. This is where
So again, if that's true, that should undercut the first argument that, oh, you can't, it's bad for workers to organize unions or for unions to demand too much stuff because otherwise the people will leave. Well, if you think there are these tools that are being implemented that are going to make it harder to leave, then the first thing is less true, right? Do you think that you'd be able to recruit better teachers if you paid more?
100%. But explain to me that who makes that decision then? up the price of a cheeseburger, double up the price of a cheeseburger, double, stuff like that. It's my understanding that we have narrowed the gap on some of these trade deficits. It hasn't crashed the economy.
Sorry, I'm not sure if there was actually like a skip in the video, or if my cat walked over the keyboard and skipped it ahead. So I just want to look at that second part again to make sure we didn't miss something.
If you paid more,
100%. But explain to me that who makes that decision then here in California? Let's say who chooses how much these guys get paid? It's not the unions; it's the state. That's not a public. These are public schools, right?
This is the thing. Like if you want to say the teachers,
so it's not a private company effing these guys over.
I mean,
because they get paid more at a private school.
I mean, if you think that the union having too much power is the problem, well, I mean,
I'm saying if it gains too much power,
okay,
it seems like it can lead to like what we had with in Britain.
Because the thing that the thing that they have the most ability to negotiate over is stuff like what the wages are. So if you think that the wages
with the state. That's not even a private company. Why do we want to give more power to the state? They're not even honest actors.
So we just real quick, lightly around two things, right? So one, on the winner of discontent, because that's come up a bunch of times, right? I think that if you really wanted to have a discussion about that, right? I mean, we could both spend some time, right?
I feel like over here no good, over here no good.
Why you're assuming?
I want to be here.
That I don't know why you're assuming that the unions were in the wrong in that situation, right? That they have that, in other words, that it's the
quintessential example of unions having too much power.
But people using it as lots of people use lots of things as quintessential examples that you wouldn't agree with, right? I mean, just because lots of people who have a certain perspective use that as their main example doesn't mean that they're right.
It does seem like you get 2 + 2 and it equaled 4.
But I mean, again, I think that just because lots of people who have this perspective point to that as an example doesn't necessarily mean they're right about the example. But the other thing I was going to say, and I guess this is the bigger thing when you talk about giving the state, more power, right? I think that, look, if giving the state more power means that you and I have, you and I have fewer, free speech rights, for example, then I would be very against that. That gets to a lot of my problems with the Trump administration, by the way. Maybe we can talk about that.
The Democrats.
They have,
I see the exact same stuff.
Do you think, well, I don't think it's exactly the same, but also, I mean, I'm sure you're not.
I could show you clip after clip after clip and even freaking magazine covers.
Conversation under the impression that I love the leadership of the Democratic Party.
I know. Okay. Table that then. We may agree on it. Table that.
If what you mean by the government having more power,
okay, keep talking.
Is that they have more power to arrest people and put us in jail or whatever.
No, hate that.
That's one thing. But if what you mean is that the government has more power to protect workers and consumers against,
I feel like they F everything up. There's so much fraud and corruption, and
that seems totally different to me.
Oh, really?
So yeah,
that's what I'm talking about.
So no, but what I'm saying is if more power means more power to put people in jail, that's one thing. If more power means more power to protect workers and consumers against private companies doing whatever they want,
I'm with you on that. I see it in food and healthcare all the time.
Right. So they have and
I want them regulated.
I would also say that if you want government to have less power, I think oftentimes having social programs be universal, so there's no government decision maker who could decide, oh, you get it, you don't, but rather we all get it just because we're part of the society. We all have a right to it. That actually seems to me that it makes government bureaucrats have less power because they can't decide who gets it, who doesn't.
Okay, hold on. Now streaming podcasts on Fox One because sometimes the headline is not enough. Fox One into what's happening, get you closer to the voices.
All right, yeah. Muting the ad. So I think that I'm trying to think if I have anything to add to this. It is a little frustrating. I don't think that was my cat because when I went back to it, I think I got to the same spot that wasn't there. I think that there was just a cut in the video. I don't think that that's malicious. I don't think I was making some particularly amazing point during the cut, I wonder if something just happened in video editing. But I believe in the part that we
From
missed,
Snap.
there's like a minute there of talking about teachers unions, and maybe some of what I'm remembering will actually be later on. And Jillian has her complaints about COVID, right? I mean, I think part of her becoming a right winger was having a right wing reaction to COVID. I think it's a pretty common trajectory for a lot of these figures. And so one of her complaints about the teachers unions was them wanting to keep the schools closed longer. But then she also said that actually the wages of California teachers aren't very good. And I think we did see the part where I was responding to this, but we didn't get the setup, so the response might have been confusing because my response was, well, hold on. If you're saying that all the COVID stuff you don't like is because the teachers union is too strong, then why aren't they being paid more? Because the actual bargaining power of the teachers union, right? They have much more ability to bargain over wages than they do to decide what the state of California's COVID policies are going to be, even for the schools. So that was the point, but let's keep watching.
What's happening, get you closer to the voices shaping the conversation across, and is not enough. Ton on this stuff.
Yeah.
From SNAP and Medicare and Medicaid and all of this, and it's a shit show. So I had all the freaking lists of the programs. Oh, here. Okay,
Sure.
bet.
Yeah.
So when I looked at the comparison to how much proportionately we're putting towards social programs, it's similar to Nordic countries, but the outcome is super duper divergent. So in a terrible way for us. So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, ACA, subsidies, SNAP, housing assistance, and we still produce terrible outcomes, poor health, poverty, inequality. So I guess the argument, right, that becomes, you want to give them more control, you want to add more to this when we can't even manage the stuff that we already are doing.
Or is it that we're that actually, if you have something like the ACA, which was on your list, it's like, what does the ACA do at its core, right? It's this
supposed to provide affordable health insurance.
Okay, but how does it do it, right? Like the way that the ACA does that is, through this, patchwork of regulations and subsidies, oftentimes going to private companies, which is a very inefficient way of doing it, right? So if you want to say, hey, we're spending all of this healthcare related money, right, but we're not getting as good results, well, I would say let's look around the world and let's see some of the places that actually have really good results. Certainly, if you look at the World Health Organization does rankings of healthcare systems, by different countries. And if you look at a bunch of the places that do better than us on there, instead of having some weird patchwork of subsidies, and we'll do a little bit of Medicaid expansion, and we'll do this health insurance market where we're supposed to do window shopping for health insurance plans that nobody, the difference is, it's like asking people to do window shopping between what are essentially just complicated financial instruments that you don't understand when you're looking at it. Doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that sounds like an incredibly inefficient way of doing it.
It's a mess.
As opposed to just saying, hey, do what Canada does, right? Say
Canada's got tons of problems too, though. That's
but just saying they have tons of problems.
Okay.
I mean, the question is always, which system, right? Comparative choice. Which system would you rather live under? And again, I think there's a reason.
I'd rather find it. I go back to this conversation, right?
Okay.
I could show you, I have a friend who had breast cancer and almost died.
Mm-hmm.
It was 30 weeks for her to be able to see a specialist. I had another friend at 14 months for a hip replacement. Rich Canadians I know, they come over here to get health care. And the wait times and the different territories, and it's 30 minutes for an ambulance. They have an absolute devastation of medical talent because the doctors aren't getting paid enough, so they leave. So I'd be like, okay, well, you're asking me to compare bad and worse. To me, I'm like, how do we solve all these problems together. And, I would say addressing that here, I would handle it a bit differently. That's where I'm like, it doesn't seem like it works tremendous. I get that the prevention is better, unquestionably.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to diseases like cancer, it's actually worse. So
again, I think there's a reason why so few Canadians want to trade for what we have, right? I mean, this is
really,
this is
I
the
hear the shit that I just told you.
okay. You hear that, but like, when's the last time that even somebody like Pierre Poilievre, right, the sort of very conservative politician who was in the last election, who, by the way, was going to win and would have won
Trump tanked him.
if Trump hadn't
Didn't tank him.
tanked him. But they have but even somebody like Poilievre wasn't saying, hey, let's end Medicare. That's also what they call the single payer insurance in Canada. Let's end that, or let's privatize it, right? Let's do the American system. He wasn't saying that. He couldn't have said that, because it would have been a catastrophe for him if he had said
Get rid of the middlemen. So you make prices transparent. Don't let hospitals
prices being
buy up family businesses. This kind of stuff.
Prices being transparent. I'll
give you an example.
Sure.
So what I have now started to recommend to people, even though our system is effed, it's just to work within the system, would be to have a high deductible healthcare plan and an HSA. And then you have the ability, I have a friend who's injured. She's currently out of work, doesn't have insurance. And I was saying, do you realize that you can negotiate for an MRI? Mm-hmm. And I know a place where you can get one right now for $300. If I do it through my insurance, it's $5,000. Mm-hmm. And then I have a deductible and I end up paying more. They don't understand the way the system works. There's no transparency. And then when they buy up all these local doctors' offices and integrate them into the hospital, because the insurance companies, they own everything. They own the pharmacy benefit manager. And Trump is bypassing those guys right now.
So price transparency is only going to get you so far, right? I mean, if I have
both options, government and private,
if I'm on my way to the hospital and somebody tells me exactly what they're going to charge me,
but you have emergency Medicaid here.
Then I'm not, I'm not going to just say, oh, turn around and find a better hospital. And I also think that the sort of, more basic question, right? I mean, we can talk about wait times and all that. I think that a lot of that is often pretty exaggerated. I think the fact that if you're a rich Canadian, you can come here because your money lets you jump to the head of the line, I think should be a source of national shame for us, because they have having more money should not mean that you're treated sooner than anybody else. I think that's morally pretty abhorrent. But I think that there's also a basic question
that this system is totally screwed. People die because of it unnecessarily.
Yeah, and even
all the time they have to ration their medication. It's devastating.
And and even beyond that, right? I think that there's a question about freedom, because if you have private health insurance, and even if you have what you're talking about, let's have a hybrid, let's have a little bit of both. I mean, we kind of already have a little bit of both.
England has a little bit of both.
They have but at least in England, right? You have the absolute guarantee that everybody gets the public system. We certainly don't have that. We certainly don't have that here. But they have also my problem with that, right, is that anytime that you do that, that always ends up being a two-tiered system where, unless you're going to, change the laws to force people to take it, right? Like a lot of doctors and clinics aren't going to take the public one because they know they can get more money out of the private one.
Yep,
So at that point, you've got different healthcare systems for poor people and rich people. And I have a problem with that. But I also, on a basic level, I have a problem with private health insurance just on the level of human freedom, because I think that
I agree with you. I don't want to finish your thought. I'm sorry. I agree with you. I just think it's a different way to reform it.
People stay. I mean, there's a book by Anja Srinivasan called The Nordic Way of Everything. So she's from Finland, and she married an American and moved to the United States. And she's not a socialist or anything like that, right? She's just a Finn. But she was what she writes about in the book is that she was shocked by a lot of what she saw in the United States, because you had what seemed to her like these pre-modern relationships of dependency between workers and bosses. People stay at jobs they hate because they don't want to lose their employer health insurance. Sometimes between husbands and wives, there are people who stay in bad marriages or even abusive ones because they don't want to lose their spousal health insurance. And, if you have, if you take away that element, right, and say, look, we all get health insurance just for being a person. It's not linked to your job. It's not linked to your marriage, right? We all get it. Then how much more free are people to live their lives the way they want to live
How
them?
in the heck are you going to pay for it? It's going to add trillions.
Well,
How
actually,
do you do it?
if you look at several years ago, the Mercatus Center, which is actually
I have my stuff on these Nordic countries.
which is actually a libertarian think tank.
Okay, yeah.
They have, and they issued this big report. Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan is going to cost, and then there's some eye-poppingly huge number.
Yeah,
and
it's trillions of dollars.
And they do the thing that people always do when they do this, which is that anytime you want to make a number sound scarier, instead of telling us the per year, tell us the per decade, so you can move the decimal point one digit over.
Okay.
But they have then, but then Matt Brunick, the People's Policy Project, looked at that. He was like, wait a second. If we run this number, if your number is correct, that's actually less than we're spending on healthcare right now, which goes back to your point 10 minutes ago, right? You said.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm sorry. I think this pertains to your thought, or I wouldn't interrupt it.
Sure.
So all this stuff shutting down the government and healthcare and everything we went through.
Yeah.
I was told that that the Democrats put the sunset deadline in there. That was their sunset deadline for the healthcare, the Obamacare subsidies, right? That started during COVID. Okay. Now I was told that the reason they had to put a sunset date in is because the amount of money that it would cost was so astronomical that they weren't able to make it a fixture. It literally went against some law of being able to add so much to the deficit.
Yeah.
But that's the Democrats who made that decision.
Well, I mean,
they put the sunset clause in there.
Again, see above, read the Democrats, but also also though they have
but that was the Obamacare subsidies.
But this is Mercatus. These are people who are ideologically opposed to Medicare for all. And if you actually run their own numbers that produce that eye-popping figure, then if you look at what everybody, public and private, right, is spending on healthcare right now, right, it's less than it would cost to it's more than it would cost to do Medicare for all, which makes sense because you have all of this duplication of bureaucracy. You have
that's for sure.
You have all of these companies have all these elaborate mechanisms set up to pay people to
the fraud's bananas. It's insane across the board as well.
So it makes a lot of sense. And so even with the Mercatus numbers, yes, if you had a modest tax increase to pay for Medicare for all, and it wouldn't even have to be a terribly progressive tax, right? Even if you had one that it's we're not saying we're just gonna tax super rich people a lot, whatever, right?
Well, that's not what they're doing in the Nordic countries, though, which is what
sure. But this is the point, right? Even if you did that, right? Then if you take even using the Mercatus numbers, if you take the pre-tax increase, right, amount that a middle income taxpayer is how much they were spending on taxes plus health insurance premiums, copays, and deductibles before versus the increased tax bill now, they'd actually be saving money.
Ben, you say this and I haven't looked at those numbers, but then why wouldn't somebody step up to the plate and be a hero then if it works so well?
Well,
because Biden could have done it. And Trump could do it now. And we all know this has been a disaster. Obama broke his arm patting himself on the back for Obamacare, but it hasn't.
I think somebody did step up to the plate and try to be a hero on this. Who's Bernie Sanders, and the Democratic establishment is very much in with corporate America, and so they have
from him. I do know that.
And they worked hard to make sure that he didn't get that nomination. So it's I think that I mean, look, I don't think that the fact that something hasn't happened, I think that you would agree, right? There are lots of things that you want, right, that you think would work better, that no government, that the government hasn't implemented. I don't think that you think
100%.
So just because
I think they're totally captured by these guys.
Yeah.
I just don't think when I look at the socialized medicine, it sounds wonderful, but then everybody's like, yeah, look at all the problems it created over here. Look at all the problems it created over there.
Who's everybody?
Well, okay. Like when I look at these statistics and these numbers of 30-minute ambulance times and 14 months for a hip replacement and 30 weeks to see a specialist, and the fact that the statistics show people are dying more of cancer there than they are here because they're waiting so long. So the prevention's better.
Life expectancy is
there
better.
are other factors there.
Sure, but they have a
car accidents are a factor of that. Gunshot wounds are a factor of that, which is a separate.
But there's also mortality amenable to healthcare, right? I mean, that's like
you've got mostly prevention stuff.
Okay.
It's mostly the preventative piece, but the metabolic disease.
But if we agree that fewer people are dying who medical intervention could have saved overall,
no, the argument becomes medical intervention. We're actually saving more here because for things like cancer, and these diseases like lupus or all these things, because they're getting seen more quickly. Now it's the number one cause of bankruptcy in our country. Yeah. So this is where I'm saying I don't think either of these work super duper.
I think
that's all.
I think wait times are going to be longer if you let more people in the line. Right. I think that I think part of the reason we get shorter wait times in the US is because we kick some people out of the line because they can't afford it. Right. I mean, we have Medicaid and, we have ACA subsidies, but I'm sure, people, if you talk to people who are in their 20s or 30s, right.
Yeah.
People who are.
My brother just had a crazy infection on his arm and couldn't afford to go to the doctor. I'm like, but Greg, you have, but there's state Medicaid in California. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around why he doesn't use it. That's the other thing is when I look at some of these programs, I got in an argument with his fiance, my brother's fiance, about the cost. She's actually very liberal, very, 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 very liberal. But we were talking about Charlie Kirk's, statement that college is a scam. I'm not saying it is a scam. I'm simply saying that it does cost kids gazillions of dollars if their parents don't cover it, puts them in debt. And there's a stigma to not completing college. I want my kids to go to college, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But she was like, well, there's all these grants. And she was arguing against Charlie Kirk, talking about all the grants that she was able to get for college, like go to City College for 2 years and then apply for aid and it's forgivable. Like what's going on with all this?
So
why is this a mess?
Sure.
We have all the SNAP and the this and the that and the thing and the that, and it's still a mess.
Even if it were the case, right, that for everybody who needs it, right, that like all of this help is available, and it's really not. I mean, I think that there's, again, so much of this stuff is need-based that like anytime something is means tested, that always means there's going to be a gray zone of people who could really use the help and who are not getting it, and then they're going to resent it because why do I have to pay for this thing that I'm not even getting the benefits of, as opposed to a universal program that we all pay into and we all get. I think that you only get one life to live, and getting to spend a few years of it, focusing on reading and thinking, I think is really valuable. And I think that I don't think we should have a system where if you're not, depending on what kind of family you're born into, either you get that just no problem, right? Or maybe you get it, right, if you're deemed like worthy of enough help, or maybe you have to go into crazy debt, to do it, right? I mean, like this seems like a terrible way to do that. I mean, I think that like imagine how bad it would be if like going to high school worked like that.
I know. I do agree with you that these things are broken. I guess I don't think I've never seen socialism work outside of, right, your Nordic countries. Okay. So these are the criticisms, because I've had this conversation the other way around, where I was like, well, it works over here.
Yeah.
And then this was the pushback that I got.
Sure.
So first of all, our population is 10 times the size. Second, we're a federal republic of 50 distinct states, each with its own constitution, tax codes, and political priorities. There's no way to get everybody on the same page here, which does seem to be, in my opinion, after having listened to all of this, the greatest obstacle, and you're never going to undo that, the trust problem. So and what I mean by that is I just gave you all these freaking programs, and I think people don't understand how much taxes rich people pay. When I look at my taxes, Ben, I'm like at 70%. And here's what I mean by that. So when I lived in California, so you're at like 38% federal, 13.3 state. Then you've got property taxes, corporate taxes, city taxes, death taxes, capital gain taxes, gas taxes. And by the time I'm done, 70 cents on every dollar goes to the government. And I'm like, that's good. You're welcome. I don't see anything. My roads are freaking, the PCH fell into the darn ocean. The schools suck. They don't have tremendous outcomes. The vast majority of our 8th graders don't read. You've got all this corruption and healthcare and fraud, and the money's going to NGOs that use it for God knows what. And the trust is gone. I don't trust them with my money anymore. Okay. Next one. We don't have, here's another thing that we definitely don't have here, which is truly a shame. The argument is that in these countries, they've got like a solidarity, a homogeneity where they believe in the same things, they identify with one another. Hence, I guess, the idea that it's a very close-knit, small society. Here, I hate this, but everybody hates each other. They hate each other. The Democrats hate the Republicans hate the Democrats, gays and straights hate each other, like the blacks and whites hate each other. Like, it's horrible. But my point is, I don't know that people are willing to make those sacrifices because they feel like, I'm not going to help that guy. I'm not going to help that guy. I'm not saying it's good. I'm simply telling you it seems to be an ugly reality, one that I hate, by the way. Okay. And another one, okay, we pay 3.4% into NATO, which again, I'll go back to one of the reasons. And everyone's like, Trump is a scumbag. He's a bastard. He's destroyed our reputation on a global scale. I've listened to Sam Harris say that so many times. But at the same time, I've also listened to...
I mean, it's a pretty big accomplishment to get Canadians to hate us. I mean, that did not...
Okay, but hear me out. Hear me out. Here's the argument to that. Okay. As far as I understand it, is that they were only paying 1.5% to NATO. Yeah. And they're supposed to pay like 2.4% of their GDP. And then they're sitting there doing all these trade deals with China. And we're like, wait a second. How are you doing business with China? But we've got this USMCA trade deadline coming up on July 1st. So my point simply is that these countries are paying less than, we're paying almost triple what they're paying to NATO, right? And then people get upset because they look at it and they go, well, that's easy for you. We're funding all this defense. And you get all these great social programs.
Yeah, I would like the United States to cut its defense budget by a lot. But like going back to the first one, right?
Okay.
Because you just listed off.
I got a couple more, but let's go one by one.
I want to make sure that I don't forget the ones you already listed
I have.
Right?
So many guys. I had a list, and then you can blow it up for me. Okay, and the last thing, and arguably the most important, okay, Ben, is that in those countries, they don't just tax the rich; they tax the shit out of the. I swear so much in this episode. I'm sorry. They tax the heck out of the middle class. Okay, that's my list. Okay, go.
Okay. Let's see.
The bullets are at the bottom.
The bullets are at the bottom. Okay. I see. It's the. So I think the U.S. I think the U.S. being 10 times the size makes it easier for us, not harder for us, to get away with a lot of these things, because it means that we're less reliant on the rest of the world market than like a smaller country would be. And like I also think that a lot of these things, right, just a sort of general like view from 10,000 feet point, right, is that, oftentimes, right, people will just sort of like list off, right, a bunch of differences between us and the Nordic countries. But then like the thing that you really have to do is to say, okay, but here's why that difference, would mean that like what works there wouldn't work here.
That's your job.
Because if you haven't done that, right? So steal a line from my friend Nathan Robinson, right? Like it's like he calls this like the fjord argument, right? It's like, well, what works in Norway could never work here because we don't have fjords here, right? It's like this is like you gotta say why that means it, right? So like the fact that
that's my list.
The fact that we're bigger than them, right? Like again, I can see a big reason why that would make it easier here, right? Not harder. I want to hear the reason that makes it harder. It's certainly true that that American federalism, the way that we divide up power between the state and the federal government, makes it harder to change anything, right? Like this is that it's like anytime, I mean, look, if we could just forget what I want, right? Like if we could just get the Jillian Michaels list of things that should change about the laws of American society, this would apply to making that harder too, right? It would apply to making any
No,
change
I agree.
harder,
Yeah,
right?
I
You know,
know.
so I don't think it really tells us if what we're trying to figure out is what we should be trying to strive for, right? Should we be
But
trying to?
it seems like it's impossible. And there are things I like about that though, because let me tell you, I didn't like what happened during COVID, and I moved out, and I'm
Yeah.
glad I was able to do that. And I think that you would probably be miserable in a place like Texas or Florida, and
I,
you'd be so glad to live here.
I lived in Florida for 6.5 years.
Oh, really?
I kind of miss it actually, but
No
that's
kidding.
not.
But I doubt you miss the I mean, I guess you don't miss
No,
the
I
politics.
don't miss it because of the politics. No.
Okay. Well, okay. See, the change in
Yeah.
governance
Yeah.
helped me maintain my sanity during COVID.
Yeah.
And so while I think there's good and bad, I wouldn't want to change that. But it also presents what seems to be an impenetrable obstacle.
But my problem with that is that if we're trying to figure out, all right, is the goal we should be striving for, right? Like a bunch of Ben Burgis socialist goals or a bunch of Jillian Michaels goals or whatever you think the goals are, like however you think the way we do things now should change, this one's going to make any of them harder, right?
I know.
So it cuts in all directions. And I would also say, like, on a lot of the social solidarity stuff, right? Like, I think it's certainly true, right? That that in the United States, you know, we have very, very low levels of social trust, but I would question the causation
None.
there, right?
Zero.
In other words, like, is this just some like innate inferiority of American culture that like we're just like that? Or could it be downstream of the fact that we live in this really, you know, precarious society where people's needs aren't met, where people, you know, where people think that they have to like fight each other for every crumb, right? Like,
I
could that be
do
part of that?
think, I cannot say this enough. I think that the horizontal fight is manufactured on purpose to prevent people like you and I, even though I could never solve
Yeah.
these problems, but to prevent people like you and I talking. I really believe that. Because if I said, Ben, I think we have
Uh.
the same goal. We want to fix healthcare,
Yeah.
right? Forget all the things you think we disagree on. Okay. We don't like that people are dying. This is terrible. We want people to get care. Okay. Then it becomes, you know, an arena of ideas. And this is like, well, okay, I like your idea here, but here's where I think it's flawed. Well, Jillian, you've got a point there, but here's where
Yeah.
it falls apart. And then you've got this collective effort to solve a problem, but instead it's like, you know, MAGA, the racist, blech, and then libtard, socialist, commie, and we're effed, and they win. That's why I am so desperate to talk to people and to see more people talk, and the people that do it get killed. They get killed. Fred Hampton, who was one of the young Panthers, they killed him over this. Literally, the FBI killed him. And whether, you know, you had I thought you had a beautiful conversation with Charlie,
Yeah.
whether you liked it or not.
I liked it.
I thought it was very respectful and very civil and made me feel great to watch. Even though you guys didn't agree on how to solve a problem,
Yeah.
you both acknowledged many similar problems. And so I guess this horizontal argument, I think it's evil and I think it's on purpose. So hence me saying, okay, I want the same thing you do, at least with healthcare,
Okay.
but solve those problems then, Ben.
Well, I think that if we had a society where people didn't have to worry that, you know, if they lost their job, they would be losing their health care, didn't have to worry that if they didn't make enough money, they wouldn't be able to send their kid to college. In other words, I think that if we moved in a more Nordic direction, I think that would go a long way to solving a lot
But
of these
these are what they're
problems.
saying are the problems with it. So then it's like, and then the trust element is not just the way we fight amongst each other, which we just talked about, but the fact that I'm like, I give you 70 cents practically, if not more, on every dollar, and you guys F everything up. And every time, like NASA couldn't get to space. It required billionaires to do the job. I mean, it's like,
Well, I mean, okay, NASA did get to
I
space.
know they did, but I'm saying then like the whole program fell to shit and they stopped for like years.
What?
And like Elon Musk is the guy, whether you love him or you hate him, that's catching rockets with chopsticks and shit.
I mean, I think that the fact that we live in a society where a lot of people have to worry about how they're going to meet basic needs like healthcare. A lot of people have to worry about how they're going to like pay for their kids to go to college.
I agree.
And on the other end of that inequality, we have people who can literally afford their own spaceships. I
I
mean, that
know.
seems like an obscene level of inequality to me.
I don't disagree with you about that at all. But two thoughts. Two
Sure.
thoughts. I simply don't see the state as being able to fix it because they never seem to have here.
Well, except
In there, I know what the problems are. Okay,
so
okay.
this, like look, the laws of economics don't work any differently in
But
Sweden
do you
than they
think the
do in the
middle
US.
class wants to get the shit taxed out of them? Like when Mamdani makes all these promises, he's standing outside Ken Griffin's house,
Yeah.
who then swiftly left and took all his jobs to Florida.
Sorry, what jobs was
Ken Griffin was so pissed
uh-huh.
about Mamdani standing outside of his house that he like shut down, I guess, the office space that he was opening.
This sounds like a good argument against having a system where individual oligarchs can own so much that they can have a temper tantrum about a politician and take away all these jobs. It sounds like an argument for socialism to me. I'd also point out
But then
that
he goes to
that, like, that-
Florida
that-
and
that
brings
if you
all those
wanna-
jobs.
that yes, again, sometimes they shoot the hostage. I would argue that that's a problem with them having too much power, not a problem with the rest of us not giving them everything they want all the time. I'd also point out that like if you look at the overall predictions that Mamdani was going to lead to this huge exodus of affluent people from New York, so far it hasn't really panned out.
I actually don't know the numbers on that. To be honest with you, Fletch, can you check and see if there's any numbers on how many people have left New York because of Mamdani? Okay. So speaking of Mamdani,
Sure.
Okay.
Speak of Mamdani.
he does say there's no universe where he's like, I'm going after the middle class. It's always I'm going after the rich. But these guys don't build and they also have a huge oil reserves. And here, I know you don't love the Democrats, so it's a tough argument to make, but they're constantly kneecapping everybody who wants to drill for oil. But with Norway, right? They've got a crazy oil economy.
Well, look, if you're going to say that Norway, and of course this is not true of all the Nordics, but it is true of Norway, right? Like that Norway can have all these great social programs because they've got a bunch of oil. Great news about us. We do too.
I know, but then, but could you concede then that maybe you're okay with some of Trump's policies on drilling, on opening up the market, or you now still hate him?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think if you want to get into my complaints about Trump, that's maybe a different 20 minutes than
I know, and I'm just saying. I guess when people look at him,
I'm very, very happy to do it. But I just want to say,
yeah,
like on on the Mamdani question, right? Because you brought it up. Yeah, I mean the stuff that he's talking about is modest enough that it doesn't require middle income tax breaks, which is good also because I think like an individual city, right, has less ability to manage that than a state or especially a whole country. But yes, it is true, right, that like if you live in one of the Nordics, as a middle income taxpayer, you're paying more taxes.
Nailed.
But weirdly enough, right, most people who live in those countries think that the deal is worth it, right? I mean, I don't think
you could sell that to an American? They just want to tax the rich. That's all I see. Eat the rich, tax the rich, AOC, tax the rich. And I'm like, homie, this is what they're taxing the middle dude. And then Mamdani ended up turning around and saying like, well, I guess I'm going to have to raid the rainy day fund. I guess I'm going to have to, drop the death tax from millions to 750,000 and then increase the number substantially.
My understanding is that the budget shortfall was predated him, right? I mean, that's not something that he did. In fact, he was able because the way that New York City finance works, there's like always this like weird, complicated, financial arrangements back and forth, between the city and the state, right? And that he was able to negotiate something that got rid of the budget shortfall and still did some of what he wanted. But like it seems like, yeah, look, I think there are two different issues here. One is could we have a lot of what Mamdani is talking about in New York, without having to raise middle income taxes. And then the other is if we were going to do something more ambitious, like having Medicare for all, would we have to raise middle income taxes to do that, right? The answer to the first one could be no. The answer to the second one could be yes, but it could also be worth it because if, I'm a middle income taxpayer, like I don't care whether you call the money that I have to spend a premium or a copay or a deductible or a tax. I care how much money I have to spend.
I just don't know that people want to do it. Whenever I see them get like excited about this, it's always about going after the rich. It's not, okay, yes, I'm willing to pay a little bit more to get this. I don't see that. And then you've got the fact that, we're paying into NATO 3.4%. And, now Trump's making people pay more, but historically they weren't even paying close to what we were. We were subsidizing their security. And then they get all the benefits of our tax dollars paying for things like, drug R&D through the NIH. They don't have to fund that. And they get cheaper drug prices because they don't have the pharmacy benefit managers, which Trump has been dealing with. That's where I see all the things people don't like about him. I just, in this argument, I also see him addressing things that have been effed up for a long time. Now, you could say, I don't think it's going to work, Jill, and you could 100% be right. But I guess I just look at it and I'm like, but he's trying to deal with that problem, like the pharmacy benefit managers who are the middlemen for the people watching that have historically made a $5 vial of insulin $300. And he's the one that is effectively
it's funny because
bypassing
there
that.
was a 4 years ago, right? There was a vote in Congress about capping the price of insulin, and all the MAGA Republicans voted against it.
Because they're all on the freaking take from the pharma and big insurance lobbies. They all are. I don't agree with it. I that's another thing about me. I have no judgment on MAGA. I think they're very hardworking people who've watched their American dream slip away, and they see Trump as the answer for all the reasons I'm suggesting right now. Personally, I am a moderate. It's very easy to dismiss me, though, because that's the number one pejorative nowadays is to call people MAGA, which makes me feel terrible for people who are actually MAGA, because I think that they are exactly what I'm talking about. They're people who, as you suggest, have watched their dreams slip away. But I'm not saying that's right. I don't think what they're doing is right. I just think that regulating those guys. So Victor Davis Hanson is the one who gave me this concept of a continuum. In other words, like laissez-faire capitalism of free trade and do whatever you want is terrible. But fair trade, regulation on these companies, that makes sense to me.
Other than the point about the federalism, about the states, which would apply to whatever, Jillian Michaels, Victor Davis Hanson approved balance you want, right? This would be a problem for that, right? Like this would be a problem for anything, right? So like I don't see why this is an argument specifically against Nordic style policies. And again, I think that the social trust is often downstream of the policies, not the other way around. It's not that there's just something about American culture that's like innately inferior to Swedish culture or whatever, right? Like I think it's what kind of society do you build, and I think like what kind of needs are met, how we take care of each other is part of what leads to those low or high levels of social trust.
Remember those days in your early 20s when you could survive on 4 hours of sleep and caffeine? But that doesn't work anymore, does it? And if I don't get quality rest, I am dragging for days. And with my discount reel, you've got that will say how it works. With my discount reel, just go to shopbeam.com/reel today and get yours. Looking at Mamdani.
Yeah.
He makes these promises, but then you've got economists, and I'm not saying maybe there are economists that will say how it works, but these are the top criticisms, right, of a freaking government-run grocery store. First of all, they don't get their first one in 4 years. It's $30 million for one of them, apparently.
So I think there are two reasons why, at least when I looked it up, right, like I saw that the private equivalent would usually be, 7.2 through 10 million.
Yeah.
So I think there are two reasons why it's higher, right? Like one is good and the other is bad. I think that the one that's good is using union labor, right? Providing like good construction jobs, the kind that we need a lot more of. That's the good part. I think the part that's bad is that it has to be because of the way that government hamstrings itself from building more. I mean, this is like I'm going to name a very, very not socialist source here, right? I mean, if you read Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's Abundance book, one of the things that I still think as a socialist that they got right, is that there are a lot of ways that that government regulates itself to make it harder to build things. And in fact, I think some of that, I mean, it's easy to blame, the groups, environmentalists, whatever, and I'm sure there's some truth to that, but I think that a lot of that is because actually like private sector lobbyists like it, right, to be difficult, for the government to build things because they don't want the competition. But like I think that the sort of basic idea that there's something about running a grocery store that, like, and again, we're talking about 5 of them, right? Like this is not, we're not talking about like, like seizing all of the bodegas in the 5 boroughs and putting them in public ownership. We're talking about one each, right? In an area that's underserved by low cost private options. And I think the idea that there's something about having a few city-owned grocery stores that's just gonna lead to economic meltdown is very strange to me because
Not economic meltdown.
because if you look at like we already have lots and lots of government-run stores. I mean, the Department of Defense operates hundreds and hundreds of commissary stores. If you drive not that far from New York to New Hampshire, they have all of the liquor stores are state liquor stores, and in fact, lots of New Yorkers do drive to New Hampshire because it's cheaper, right, at the state liquor store than it is at the private options everywhere.
State liquor store.
Yeah, they have.
Never heard of a state liquor store. What the heck is that for?
If you
tequila.
Yeah, I mean, look, part of the reason that they do it that way is that it's actually like one of the because oftentimes politics in New Hampshire is like very libertarian on other issues, so there are a lot of things they just don't want to tax, and so like this brings in a lot of public revenue. So
Okay.
so I don't know if
you.
you've like if you drive like back when I used to live in New Jersey, I promise I never went there just to go to the liquor store, but like I have a
Don't lie, Ben.
when you drive,
Don't lie to me, Ben.
when you drive through the Northeast, right, and it's like you have all these states that are stacked really close together, so it's like so it's you're in one state and then another very quickly on that drive, and you drive into New Hampshire, you get this giant billboards, right, that they tell you where the state store is, that it's because again it brings in a lot of money.
In my younger days, man, I don't know.
So if you have, so if New Hampshire can operate all these state liquor stores, if the Department of Defense can operate all these commissary grocery stores, I don't know why it should be impossible for New York to have 5.
Okay, here would be the argument that I would put forward to you.
Sure.
I would simply say, okay, you've got all it's $30 million freaking dollars. It's going to take 4 years. There's already a very small margin for supermarkets of like 1.5 to 3% on food. It like, how do the other chains and the private companies compete? But here's my thought. Why would we not just what about food stamps though? Then you save the $30 million. You got the freaking food stamps. You preserve the competitiveness on infrastructure costs. Isn't that a tool that we could use? What am I not?
Well, we already have food stamps. I mean, my understanding is that part of the idea here, when you talk about food deserts, is
New York's not a food desert?
the whole city. No, they have but like they have. If my understanding is that part of the idea is about where to even go to use it. Another point, though, I think it goes back to the conversation earlier about means testing that they have that that food stamps are something that that is you're going to have the government bureaucracy to decide whether you're quite poor enough
But
to
Ben, I
get
shouldn't
it.
be able to use a government grocery store. I shouldn't get food stamps. I shouldn't,
Why not?
because I don't need the help.
So
And I would argue
I
that
mean, you said earlier. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. You go.
I don't want to interrupt you, but
No,
I
please,
was
please.
just going to say, like you said earlier, you send your kids to public schools, right? Should you be able to use a free government school?
God. Okay, but I pay more in taxes for them to use that school.
Okay, but the same thing would be true for any kind of government service, right?
Oh, I feel like such a piece of crap doing that. I guess I look at these social services as a quote safety net,
but if
but
you want
not
to
a
go to
hammock for our most vulnerable. And I'm not that at the moment.
sure, but look, I mean, you know,
No,
if we
rich people
have
can't do that shit. They did it in the Jamestown colony, and all the
well,
working people were super
I
mad.
think that the look, if I you know if you told me you want to talk about the Jamestown colony, I could have spent some time on that. My vague memory, it's been years since I've actually like because I think that the Glenn Beck book I reviewed, I think he talks about it there. I you know
Tell me
get-
the story on a
but they
podcast.
have
as I
a but
remember.
like I think that was ultimately like a private venture. I think that my understanding is that like the Jamestown colony, they're still ultimately like you know, they're still ultimately like paying people in the like, you know, in the company back in England, right? Like so I think that's
I could look it up.
a little bit misleading. I could be misremembering this. This is probably the first time I've thought about this in like 3 years, right? So
Hang on, I
so
freaking
so but I think that this is ultimately not an example of public or collective ownership. I think that they're ultimately
Okay.
like financed by some, you know.
Tell me when you're ready.
Okay, sure, go for it. Give
Okay.
it to me.
Okay, the connection
good.
between the Jamestown colony and communism centers on how the settlement was originally structured and why it collapsed. While communism as a political ideology didn't exist in 1607, the Virginia Company established Jamestown under a strict communal property system.
Okay, but the part that seems like most important there is the Virginia Company.
Okay, often described by historians as a corporate form of proto-socialism.
I mean, what does that even mean?
I actually don't know. I was going to ask you. The failure of this system and the subsequent pivot to private property is one of the earliest and most dramatic case studies in economic incentives on American soil, the common store system. When investors of the Virginia Company funded the expedition, they required the colonists to operate under a charter that eliminated private ownership and individual profit. The mechanism of this early economic structure was straightforward. The common storehouse, all food was gathered, crops were grown, trade goods acquired, like timber or fur, had to be placed into a central shared storehouse, equal distribution. Every colonist was fed and supplied equally from this storehouse, regardless of how much or how little they contributed to the labor. The rich guys didn't want to do it. No private land. The land was owned entirely by the company. Individuals.
Well, so it is, but I mean that's a private company, right? So like, so when you say no private land, you mean that they didn't let them own any of it, right? But like, it's still a private company that's owned all the land.
But okay, but it's under this concept of like the collective, the warmth of the collective. No, and human nature ran against the design, and then they started killing each other until they let them own their own land.
Okay, but again, like it's not that let them own their own land because before it was nationalized, it's let them own their own land because before it was owned by this private company. I mean,
I guess
because you just said like, you know, the Virginia Company, corporate form.
I guess they were the
proto-socialism.
governing. I don't know what proto-socialism. Forgive me.
Sure.
I don't know what the heck that means. Proto-socialism.
I mean, I can, you know, unsympathetically, I could say that like what it sounds to me is like Gemini is summarizing the, you know, it's like
with the
Gemini is summarizing the argument that people like Glenn Beck make, and it's sort of trying to like capture the argument by sort of fudging the difference by saying, okay, well, it's not socialism, but it's like proto-socialism, so it's like almost like it. And okay, it's a corporate form.
But they had to share all this stuff, and their human nature would not allow it.
So because again, all the profits are going to the Virginia Company, right? It's still a private company.
But isn't that socialism to like all? If you say they were the governing body, though there was no government in place at the time, so. I guess so, but they were also the governing body, and they're the ones that decided.
So if the governing body is a private corporation, that doesn't sound like socialism to me. That sounds like RoboCop.
But the concept is that you weren't responsible for yourself. The meritocracy piece wasn't there. And this would lead me to my next argument on this, is that what happens. I try to figure out like what are the statistics, and while more people are favoring socialism, it's still not the majority.
Sure.
So then you've got the argument of, I don't want to do it. I work really hard. And, you know, I look at, in your debate with Charlie Kirk, he says, well, if somebody goes out and they get a second mortgage, and you said, but yeah, but Charlie, they had a house to get the second mortgage. But when I started my first business, I didn't have a house. And this is the argument that they make is like, I took all the risk. I put myself out there. If you want to show up for a paycheck and the security and the stability, like you don't have the risk, you also don't get the reward. So if people don't want to do it, what is the moral argument to make them do it if they feel like they're being mugged?
Sure. So the moral argument is that inequality shouldn't be linked to anything that's outside of your control. And so if you have, I mean, that's one of the reasons that, that we think, race or gender, discrimination is bad, right? Because that's outside of your control. And so yes, you do have some people who are upwardly mobile, who start with very little, and then through whatever combination of talent and luck, and it's always some of each.
Yes,
right?
100%.
They
Preparation, meeting opportunity.
They manage to get ahead, and so they might end up as business owners. And of course, there are also people who end up as business owners just because they have inherited wealth, right? I mean, like that happens all the time too, right? They have, whereas, if you're born into wealth, then you end up in that class, right, where you can own your own business just by default. If you are born into the working class, yeah, you might be, right, one of the lucky ones, right, who gets on one of the lifeboats. But there are only so many lifeboats of upward mobility out. We can't all be upwardly mobile, right? I mean, by definition, like, we'd all starve to death if everybody, if everybody was upwardly mobile. We need somebody to, grow crops and, drive the trucks to bring them to grocery stores and stock them on the shelves and all of that stuff, right? So we can't have a society, right? There's always going to be a very limited number of lifeboats. And so your chances.
And lifeboat means wealth.
Oh, sorry.
In our scenario?
Sorry. That's maybe that was a, whatever, but they have a lifeboat just means like lifeboat out of the working class. Like you're upwardly mobile.
I got it.
Right?
Like no longer blue collar.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So let's or whatever, like use a different metaphor, right? Like it's
I'm with you. I follow you now.
So they have
I thought you meant like out of abject poverty, but I get it. You're saying but blue
like,
collar to
but
wealthy.
Just from whether you're blue collar or white collar, just from like having from being in the working class, like the only way you can support yourself, right, is you go to work for somebody who does own a business, right? That's the majority of the population are either earning wages, dependents of people who are earning wages, or like have retired from doing that, or like kids, right? They have that's most people, right? So if you start out that way, yeah, some people, right, manage to get on one of those lifeboats, right, climb one of those upward mobility ladders, right? But most people, by definition, it's not going to be possible for everybody to do. Like it can't be, right?
Why?
So that because
why can't it be meritocracy? Why can't it be equal opportunity? I'm living proof of that.
So
Charlie was living proof of that.
But they have having the fact that
and like something like almost 70%, I think, of Fortune, Fletcher fact check me, but a very high percentage of Fortune 500 companies are either owned by immigrants or the children of immigrants because they come here and they take advantage of the opportunity and they thrive.
Yeah, well, if Fletcher is fact checking that, let's not just get how many of them are immigrants. Let's get the
children of immigrants.
Sure. Let's get the proportion of them who are children of poor people, right? Like I think that's the more relevant metric, because immigrant does not necessarily mean poor, right? There are a lot of people, right, who you're
I guess I'm thinking of like specific cases as well that I've heard of, like a woman who started a furniture store, and Warren Buffett bought her business.
But this is the point, right? Like when I say it's impossible for everybody to do it, I mean, like, that doesn't mean that some people can't, right? It's just that there are only so many, lifeboats. There are only so many escape hatches, right? That they have.
I don't like that message.
Because, well, no, I mean, like you might not like the message, but like mathematically, right? That's got to be true, because like, how would society work if everybody, right, was
not doing the blue collar jobs?
Yeah, like you have. Again, like we'd all starve to death because you need somebody to grow the crops, you need somebody to drive the truck to bring the crops to the grocery store, you need somebody to stock the shelves at the grocery store, you need somebody to be the cashier, right?
But maybe maybe they're happy doing that. That would be the argument, and they don't want to take the risk of taking a loan and doing all the.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about people being happy, I mean, it's like, look, I mean, that's like individual psychology, but my point is different than that. My point is that because it's not structurally possible for everybody to do that, right? If you are born into the working class, that majority of the population, it's not that it's impossible. It's not that nobody is going to make it through those escape hatches, but most people aren't, right? They have your chances of ending up in that position where you could own your own businesses are way, way lower than your chances if you were born into wealth, right? I mean, like so far we agree, right?
Yes. Well, the only place I disagree is I'm like a huge, if you build it, they will come. Very big on personal empowerment, like, because it's the embodiment of literally who I am.
Sure.
Whether it was like losing weight as a kid or starting a business or running a business. And listen, there's one business I have where literally it just pays all my employees.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I could shut this down because it's a pain in my ass, but it pays for the employees. So it pays for itself. And I leave it. But they're like, okay, she deals with,
which is great that you made that decision. But the question is should we have to have a society where if you're born into the working class, that you have to rely on the benevolence, right, of somebody who is in that position, right? That they have. And so, I think that it's upward mobility is great for some people, but since most people aren't going to be, even if everybody wanted to be, right? Most people couldn't be. So I think that the focus has to be on raising the floor for everybody. I think that's got to be the priority.
I agree with you. I just am not so sure that socialism is the way to do it. I haven't seen it work, and it works there, but then you have the limitations. I would prefer more regulation, more common sense, less corruption, but I like a few more examples. And then you'll have to agree to, I've kept you for almost 2 hours. Then you'll have to agree to continue talking with me. But for example, the free buses.
Yeah.
And it they tried it in Kansas City, it didn't work. They tried it in the 70s. The MTA immediately fell into disrepair. The pilot program for just 5 routes cost $12 million over 9 months.
And none of the bad stuff that people said was going to happen in the pilot program. There was you can look at a whole list of things that if you read the New York Post as they're hysterically screaming at Zoran every day in every issue, right? Like all the things that they predicted would happen because, that will happen, if we do the free buses, that it's going to, they're going to be, homeless encampments on wheels, you're going to have all these problems. It's like actually, right? Like none of that stuff happened. Right, when they did the pilot program,
though, when it was a mess, wasn't it?
So, I mean, I know less about the 70s example, but they just did this pilot program, and it was pretty successful.
It cost 12 million smackers, though.
Okay,
how do you fund that, especially when you're chasing Ken Griffin out of your state?
Well, again,
and that billionaire Jeff Bezos just gave him hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, actually.
Okay.
But see, my argument is I would incentivize these rich people to go in and create jobs.
Well, I mean, I would argue that it's the people who are doing the jobs who create the wealth of the rich people much more than the other way around. But again, you are going to, when you have people with massive stockpiles of wealth, yes, they have this position to exercise all this political power to like what you're describing is somebody who, because they're very wealthy,
has all this power.
They can exercise a veto over government policy.
That's gross. Hate it. I think we should reform campaign finance. I think it's disgusting and corrupt. But that doesn't mean I'm against capitalism. It just means I think we need to regulate it, and they can't do that. And I think we're one of the only countries in the world that allows that craziness. The essentially bribing of our government officials. And then if you don't want to do it, if you don't go on, if you don't go along for the ride, they primary them. Mm-hmm. So it's like the whole system is corrupt. I guess I just look at it as well. Like one more example. More. Okay. Rent freezing.
Yep.
I have so many friends that owned rental properties in New York that are now turning them into condos to sell. And they're like, I'm out. I'm leaving. And I pulled a few economists. So this is a woman. She's a Swedish economist. And she's not a white ringer. Her name is Assar Lindback. Forgive me if I'm butchering that. And she wrote that other than bombing, rent control is the most effective way to destroy a city's housing stock. New York's own rent-stabilized housing stock shows measurably higher rates of deterioration than market rate units, and a full freeze could accelerate that process because the financial pressure is more acute. And then this is a Stanford economist named Rebecca Diamond, who had peer-reviewed research on San Francisco's rent control. and found that landlords who were subject to rent control reduced their housing supply by 15% by converting, redeveloping, or demolishing regulated buildings. Same thing my friends did. The policy provided real benefits to the specific tenants that it covered that were like already in the system, but it made the overall rent market significantly worse by everyone else by compressing supply. So then it becomes like all these rich people leave.
So again, I think that like they speculating about what you think would happen if you
They
did what
do it.
what Zoran
They're
was talking
leaving.
about, the rent freeze for already rent stabilized apartments feels a little bit funny to me, because in the recent past in New York, I mean, you just have to go back to de Blasio, this actually did happen, and I don't think it had a particularly catastrophic effect. But also because I think the least interesting thing you can do in a live conversation is like try to like track down specific factual details, right? So I think it's always more helpful to be like, okay, let's say that's true, right? What would follow? So in like one of the last things you just read, right? There was this.
I just picked two economists that are liberal. That's why. One's Swedish. That's why I was like, okay, because
Sure.
I was trying to give you like,
So
it's not coming from me. This is my concern.
Understood.
And then they have
I mean,
case studies.
look, this is a pretty thriving debate. I don't think I don't
Debate.
think
I don't know if it's more of a conversation.
no, not you and me right now.
Okay, yeah, I was like, I can't. Are you crazy?
Like about the effects of rent control, right? Like
I
in
understand.
society,
I
right?
understand.
They have a, but like,
I'm
this
like,
is,
Ben, I mean, I
no,
appreciate
this
it,
is,
but
this is a very calm. This is very chill. That's not what I mean. They have that's like, I think that but like let's so again, opinions differ, but like let's just say for the sake of argument, right? The second person you read off is correct, right? That the effect, you're going to help people who are in these units, but you're going to get 15%
lock people out, less housing,
less housing,
less stuff gets made.
So they have so again, if you have this reaction that you have like from these landlords that they're offering 15% less housing stock, then the question is, okay, is rent control the only thing we're doing, right? Or are there other things that we could do at the same time that would balance that out? So I think that there are a couple things that we can do. One, I do think that we could offer that I think that like actually like building up more municipally owned housing, which is also something that Zoran has talked about, would be good. I would point out that a lot of these places they have a lot more of that than we do, and I understand that
it's like I give the rich guy a tax break to build there.
They're smaller countries, etc. But like you do in a lot of these places, like Sweden, right? You have like a ridiculous percentage of people who live in publicly owned housing, and it's much nicer than the publicly owned housing here. Also, though, look, I'm not against making it easier, right, in terms of red tape to build market rate private housing. I just think you need to do both.
That's interesting. I can wrap my head around that. Ben Burgis, you're absolutely lovely. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me. I know I've kept you quite some time.
Well, thank you for having me. This is great.
We were meant to talk about Israel and Palestine, and my insecurities there is I just like, if you could go back to 1947, and I'm going to be like, bro, I don't know. You said you'd be open to a conversation. There's a young kid named Nick Matau who's great, and I thought we were going to talk about that. So I was like, I have to balance this out and have Nick come on, because I can't provide a nuanced conversation with you. Then I prefer not to have like 50,000 notes on something that I think, lives are on the line over.
Sure.
So I would love it if you'd consider coming back for that.
So I will 100% do that. Right. Like I would also just say, like, this is the conversation we were having just before we started, right? Like, I think a lot of times for a lot of this stuff, right? And this is something that's often frustrated me in, conversations that I've had with people I disagree with about the Israel-Palestine stuff. I think people end up getting hung up on a lot of things that are not really the heart of the issue, that they have that they'll say like, oh, this is what happened in 1947. This is what happened with the Peel Commission in the 30s. This is what happened with
exhausting.
The Camp David negotiations.
It's brutalizing.
And what I always want to know is, okay, whichever like little factoid the person just said, if that weren't true, right? If you were wrong about this, would this actually change the way you feel about it? And if the answer is no, then why don't we talk about the more basic issue instead of like doing like competitive trivia about what happened at what peace negotiation when?
Well, honestly, I'm here to learn. I truthfully have been horrified about what's gone on. I was actually in Palestine in My goodness, it was before my kids were born, so I was going to say like 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And I, even talking to people then,
Mm-hmm.
very complicated. They even went all the way back to the Bible of like Ishmael and Israel and being of the same tribe and like all the like the hostilities and the betrayals seem to be biblical to me. Now, I don't know. I'm here to have these conversations, but what scares me personally is that this conversation, in my opinion,
Mhm.
has so far left the I don't like Netanyahu conversation
Mhm.
to, literally hanging Jews in effigy in the streets of major cities.
I do just want to point out, because she said the same thing in her conversation with Sam Cedar. In that case, she said hanging Jews in effigy in the streets of Toronto. And I didn't know what she was talking about. And then when she brought it up again here, I thought, okay, we're going to do this follow-up Israel-Palestine conversation. It'll probably come up again. So I looked it up. As it happens, we did actually already record the follow-up Israel-Palestine conversation with Nick Matau. That one was a nightmare. I actually really enjoyed the episode with Jillian you're watching now, and its own strange sort of way. I really enjoyed the conversation. But the Nick Matau thing was ridiculous. Like, I don't know when they're putting that up, but Nick was just sort of like, heckling everything all the time, and it was very, it was a struggle to get, to like actually make any substantive point, and a lot of it was diverted into the most mind-numbing trivia you can imagine, and whatever. But this thing about that Jillian says here about hanging Jews in effigy didn't come back up there like I thought it would. But but I did look it up, and I think when she says hanging Jews in effigy in the streets of major cities, in the conversation with Sam, she said hanging Jews in effigy in the streets of Toronto. I think what she's actually talking about is a protest in Vancouver. Because if you look up hanging Jews in effigy in the streets of Toronto, what you'll find, one of the first results on a Google search for that is something about Justin Trudeau condemning a protest in Vancouver, right? So I think she says Toronto, she means Vancouver. In this case, she didn't even specify which one she meant. Whatever, we all make mistakes. That's not a big deal. But the bigger thing is that calling this hanging Jews in effigy is just not accurate, right? This is extremely misleading. What we're talking about, I believe, is Bibi Netanyahu and Ben Gvir being hung in effigy in this protest in Vancouver, right? So those are specific politicians, and in fact, I would argue some of the most bloodthirsty war criminals alive today. And sure, those people are Jewish, but I think it's extraordinarily misleading to describe that as hanging Jews in effigy.
That is vile to me, and I want to make sure that and you are an honest actor, 100%. I just want to make sure that there's an honest debate about an Israel-Palestine conversation, and not the Jews are the root of all evil that has ever existed, and in fact, they're responsible for assassinating Abraham Lincoln. Like Ben, I can't anymore with it. It gets to the point where I'm like, for God's sake, all roads lead back to the Jews. Come on.
I mean, okay. First of all, I'm gonna say the rule, and then I'm gonna break it like 2 seconds later, because I absolutely hate speaking as a sentences. I think like what you say shouldn't depend on who you are, right? But like I think that, but also look, right? I mean, I come from a part Jewish family background, as I'm sure will shock nobody, right? And
I learned that I had no idea that my grandmother was an Ashkenazi Jew until like a few years ago.
Okay, well, I did know that about my grandmother, so
Did you really? I didn't know, because she told my mom, "Don't ever tell anyone."
So nobody has to convince me that anti-Semitism is a thing that exists in the world. But also, nobody even would have to convince me that it's gotten worse in the last few years. But I also think that, the reason that anti-Semitism is wrong is because everybody deserves the same rights and dignity regardless of what ethnic background they come from. And that's my same problem with the treatment of the Palestinians by Israel. And to my mind, I think that's a completely separate issue from, that, what Israel does, that's a nation state, right? What a nation state does no more, says anything one way or the other about Jews anywhere else than like what
My Israeli friends, half of them hate Netanyahu.
than what Al Qaeda says about like Muslims who live in Los Angeles.
Right.
They have
Yeah.
but to my mind, it's not biblical, right?
Really?
Like, no, I don't care what happened thousands of years ago.
It seems like that's
I don't care what I mean.
You want to start in 47?
I'm happy to start in 2026. I mean, like, what I care about are human rights that should apply to all humans, regardless of what happened thousands of years ago, regardless of what happened in 1947. I care about absolutely universal standards of human rights for everybody. That's how I think that we should judge it, not by what it says in anybody's holy book, not by what the historical trivia is. Just like, is it okay, right, to treat people this way? And all of my problems with Israel come from that. So yes, I'm happy. If you want to do another half hour right now and do it, I'm happy to do it. If you want to wait for that episode you're talking about, I'm happy to do it.
I would love to have like a deep conversation about it sooner than later.
Yes, let's do it.
And I unfortunately I'm going back to Jackson. So it would be remote.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're okay with that. I'm going home for the summer. I don't have to come back out for a couple of months.
Okay.
And I would like to do it sooner than later.
Sure. Yeah.
Unless maybe I could. Now I was going to say squeeze it on a Friday, but my daughter has her driver's test, and if she does not pass this test, I'm going to kill her.
Okay.
So,
Look, maybe
if she does not get her driver's license, Ben, I'm going to gouge my eyeballs out.
Well, maybe we could squeeze it in between the driver's test and the eyeball gouging, but that's
let me work on it. Actually,
yeah, but no, for sure.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope this will be one of our first conversations.
Absolutely.
Oh my God! Where do people? I'm so sorry. Where do people find all your stuff? Follow your podcast, read your books. I'm so sorry.
Sure.
Go.
Yeah, all good. Okay. So yeah, I have a podcast called Give Them an Argument. You can find it on YouTube or any of the usual podcast places. I write for Jacobin Magazine. That's JACOBIN. And I have a book coming out this fall, co-written by me and Bhaskar Sankara, who's the founding editor of Jacobin, and our economics professor buddy Mike Beggs, called The Blueprint, about how socialism could work. So yeah, check all that out.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Jillian.
Thank you so much for
All right. So yeah, that was, like I said, that was fun, often odd. In some of the twists and turns that took. I was definitely not expecting Fred Hampton to come up there in the way that it did, but it's the kind of thing I enjoy doing. I know I have friends who think that I'm crazy for enjoying this stuff as the way that I do, because they just look at it, and say, hey, who's gonna watch this? Who's gonna be like instantly converted to socialism by from being like a Jillian Michaels fan? So it's not going to be successful on that level, and it'd be so annoying to put yourself in these spaces. Why would you do it? But I have a different perspective on this. I think that if you take an audience full of people who have never once in their lives heard the combination of words Taft-Hartley Act, and have no idea what the legal obstacles are to organizing unions in the United States. If you take an audience full of people who have no idea that there are studies, like even by Mercatus, right, this libertarian think tank, that if we had Medicare for all, the amount of money that a middle-income taxpayer would be spending on increase taxes to pay for it would actually be less than what they're spending right now on premiums and copays and deductibles. No idea. Never heard that before, right? If they've never heard somebody say before that the reason I have a problem with Israel has nothing to do with problem with Jews, right? It's I remember during the year right after October 7th, I was just writing nonstop about Israel Palestine, and I was just getting like more hate mail, like electronic hate mail than I'd ever gotten before, and most of it was over email. And there was one point I remember though, somebody who sent me a Facebook DM, and I wasn't friends with them on Facebook, but I'm a masochist enough to look at the message request folders and see what comes up. And their opening line was, "Why do you hate Jews?" And I told them I wasn't aware that I did, and I think that would be a surprise to my family. But yeah, that I have, they've never heard before, this audience, somebody say, I have a problem with Israel, not because of anything about Jews, not because of some sort of, rival ethno-nationalist, narrative about, ancestral connection to the land or anything. I don't give a shit about any of that. It's just absolutely universal standards of human rights. They've never heard that. They've never heard anybody say that socialism would be an extended democracy to the economy, to the workplace. They've never heard any of those points, right? I think that there's real value in bringing that perspective to an audience that's never heard it, and I don't think it has to be true for there, for there to be real value. That you're going to get, even 1%, or even 0.01% of the people who are watching that to have a road to Damascus moment politically and to change all of their views, anytime soon, right? That they're just going to completely change their perspective and become socialist or whatever. It does happen, right? But it's rare, right? I remember the debate I did with Jade Epstein in Florida several years back. I talked to somebody who, this kid who drove up to the debate, who told me that when he started hate reading me and Jacobin a couple of years before, he was a libertarian, and now he was like the vice chair of his like local DSA branch, right? So like I do get people who tell me stuff like that sometimes, but look, I think it's relatively rare. But I think that the question isn't, is it going to have some huge dramatic effect? Because no, probably not, right? But I hate to tell you guys, if you write an article for Jacobin, that doesn't have a huge dramatic effect either. If you just do a normal lefty podcast episode where you have lefties talking to other lefties, that doesn't have a dramatic effect either, right? That in all of these cases, you hope that people come out of it knowing a little bit more than they did. That some people, some people might think about something slightly differently than they did before or whatever, right? But I just don't understand the case that doing debates has less of an impact than writing Jacobin articles, doing regular lefties talking to lefties podcast episodes, any of that stuff. I mean, none of this stuff is obviously the main thing that's going to deliver the political outcomes, right? Don't get me wrong. We need good union organizers vastly more than we need good podcasters. I think I've always been very clear on that since I started doing this, the sort of relatively modest supporting role that I think media of any kind can play, right? Whether you're just doing regular episodes, interviewing people who wrote a book you found interesting, writing articles, doing debates, whatever, it's all the same thing. It's all a very modest supporting role. But I do think, conversely, that you never know who's going to watch something. That I think that if you're a left-wing political junkie, it's very easy to think that, because you've heard something 100 times before, that therefore means every single person who's watching has heard 100 times before. It's always somebody's first time, right? There is never a time, anytime there's a significant audience at all, it is a statistical guarantee. There's some percentage of that audience that it's their first time hearing it. And that's all the more true when you're going into a right-wing space. When you're going into a space where you have an audience that doesn't normally hear these arguments. And, so yeah, you never know who's going to have a video come up in their algorithm. You never know who's going to click on what. You never know who's going to see a clip of it that somebody else plays in some other context. And it does seem to me that if you think about that supporting role, right, again, obviously everything we do in media is distantly secondary to organizing a union in a workplace, to knocking on doors for a socialist candidate for elected office, for all of that stuff. That IRL stuff is where the action is at, right? This is a relatively modest supporting role in that ecosystem. At the same time, though, I think that any successful movement, right, you're going to have most participants are going to be people who are a little bit ideologically motivated. They are to a great extent motivated by ways that they think that their own lives can be made immediately better by joining the union, by voting for the candidate, whatever. And who are also maybe some degree or another of a little bit tuned in or not. But every successful movement is going to be animated by a core of people who are your hardcore fanatics who live and breathe this stuff. Without that, you never get a successful movement. In fact, I think a book that I've recommended many times before on the show, and I'll just recommend one more time now. I think one of the most useful books written by a Marxist academic in a long time is The Class Matrix by Vivek Chibber. And one of the sort of powerful core points of that book is that the idea that people often have that working class resistance should be kind of the default from a Marxist class analysis. Well, it's in the interest of the working class to resist the capitalists, and so therefore working class non-resistance has to be explained, maybe through cultural analysis or ideological brainwashing, a la the sort of Frankfurt School kind of analysis. Or for that matter, frequent GTA guest Slavoj Žižek is definitely in that lane of sort of ideology critique. That sort of fundamental assumption that okay, if you're going to explain working class non-resistance, you have to supplement Marxist economic analysis with some other kind of intellectual resources. Chibber makes a really powerful argument that no, it's the other way around. That once you zoom into the level of individual incentives, Marxist economic analysis should actually predict that the default is going to be working class non-resistance. The very same mechanisms of mute compulsion that that sort of people being mutely compelled by their economic circumstances to sign on the dotted line to make that deal where they submit themselves to capitalists in capitalist labor contracts. Those very same mechanisms are going to mean that most people, most of the time, have a very rational incentive to keep their head down, to not take the risks involved in collective action, to try to pursue individual level solutions to their problem. The hard work that's done by your hardcore of deeply committed organizers is building up solidaristic culture and in ways that encourage people to take risks for each other. So over the course of time, you can get some points on the board and you can start to change that calculus of individual incentives so that people see their interests as being served by sticking with the movement. And it does seem to me that when it comes to cultivating people in that hardcore, well, that is where left media has a real role to play, right? That sort of getting people excited about socialist ideas, sort of building up some socialist political culture. And I think you never fucking know where somebody is first going to run into socialist ideas. Right? But one of the reasons that I like going into different political spaces, it's not that I expect some mass conversion of, Gen X Fox News moms, who are the sort of core demographic or whatever for Jillian. I don't expect some mass conversion of those people to socialist ideas. That's not the point. But also, all different people are at all different points in their journey, right? Their sort of personal arc at a moment where they click on any particular video, and you never fucking know when somebody's first exposure to some of these ideas is going to be, which is why I think that it's valuable to put forward these ideas, not just where people who are already in our camp are going to hear them, like Jacobin, like a podcast like this one, or TIR, or whatever, but also in as many other forums as you possibly can, right? As many other forums as you possibly can. And to my mind, the primary purpose that's served even by like writing articles for Jacobin often, like, you know, sometimes it's more theoretical, then it's more sort of like clarification for people who are already on board about some like disputed issue within the left or whatever. But like oftentimes for the more basic kind of Jacobin articles, to my mind, the real purpose that's served by that is that you're arming people with arguments that they can then use when they're talking to people in their lives who are more on the Jillian Michaels side of things, right? And so I think that, yeah, look, you know, my very good friend, right? My brother in podcasting, Jason Miles, for example, you know, will always say like, I don't get the appeal of this, right? You know, and you know, because it's not going to pay off in this huge way, and is it aggravated? Most people are going to think that, you know, whoever they're siding with originally, right? You know, whoever they're initially sympathetic with, they're going to think quote unquote won, you know. So why bother? It's like, look, different people have different roles to play. You know, somebody like Jason, I think, is one of the most talented, you know, left podcasters of his generation, and I think that he plays an immensely valuable role doing what he does. Doing this stuff would drive him crazy. I have whatever weird personality disorder I have to have to enjoy doing this stuff. So this is my lane, right? That I do it. But I think that these things are all valuable, and to the extent that left media can make a real contribution to a renewed left, I think you need all of these roles to be fulfilled. That would be my argument. Two things before I go for today, because speaking of Jason, see him soon. I've gotta get on the road to go back to Mexico. But two things before I go. One thing is that coming up on Monday, I am going to do a episode with Matt McManus and Michael Lazarus. It's going to be at the same time that we did today, 1 p.m. East Coast, 10 a.m. here on the West Coast, where we are going to talk about sort of more Hegelian Marxism versus the sort of analytical Marxism that I like. If you're not familiar with that distinction, you'll know all about it on Monday. But this is somebody Matt McManus hooked me up with, said that, you know, he thought that Michael wrote an interesting book about this, and that, you know, that the three of us could have you know, an interesting conversation about this stuff. So looking forward to that coming up on Monday. And then final thing, I just wanted to say that I kind of can't resist the temptation to do this. As I said, most people always think, like most people who care enough to leave a comment on a YouTube video are always going to think that whoever they started out sympathizing with, quote unquote, won a debate. So like anytime you go to one of these videos, I'm sure all the comments here are going to be like, oh, Ben, well, you know, cream this person. Most of the comments, of course, on Jillian's are the opposite. Pretty much the only time that's not the way it goes is if some more popular show has fans who flood the comments, right? Like after Jillian's debate with Sam Cedar, yes, the Majority Report is huge. Her comment section was just flooded with Majority Report fans. But other than that, right, that's, you know, that's pretty much how that goes. That's fine. I don't take any of that very seriously. That's just, you know, fish gotta swim, birds gotta fly. You know, fans of shows gotta think that, you know, gotta think that debates went the way they wanted them to. Again, that's natural. That's fine. But I do just want to share these two comments from Jillian's YouTube page because they're very funny to me. Yeah. So the first one, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just the first part of it says, I think he, meaning me, right? I think Ben, right? I think he made some good points if you were just half listening, but a wolf in sheep's clothing looks reasonable and unassuming too. He's a smooth talker that will hook the ignorant and unstudied, which is a shame. Got it? And then the other, so that was one at Hassenhack 428. And then there's this other guy, the Unfluenced, who did basically the same thing, but this is amazing, right? He says, smooth talking, intelligent, evil equals all caps, very dangerous, which I've got to say is a comment that made my day, right? That image of me as the Luciferian, dangerous, evil, smooth talker, which is just pretty funny also because I'm under no illusions that I am even some of the good parts of that image, right? I mean, to be honest, I think I pretty much talk like somebody with an academic background usually does, for better or worse, right? I think that people, again, I'm not saying it was most of the audience, I'm not even saying it was 10% of the audience, but I think that when people say things like that, they're not really responding to my style of presentation, which is honestly pretty low key, right? I think what they're really responding to is that I said things that bothered them because they don't like them, they ideologically reject them, but they don't know how to respond to them. And so they're discombobulated by it. And they're annoyed and creeped out because the stupid commie said things that they don't know how to respond to. And I like that because I think that is what planting a seed of doubt in somebody's mind looks like. And on that note, we will wrap for today. I will see anybody who watches this live back here on Monday morning at 10 a.m. if you were here on the West Coast, at 1 in the afternoon if you were on the East Coast. Left is best.